is a pleasure to participate in this conference, and in particular in participating in the moderate this panel. Our objective is to discuss the implementation process of a cultural agenda for higher education institutions that involves local institutions, contributes to the regeneration of cities and communities, and develops feelings of belongings. For the discussion of this important objective, we have 5 very challenging key questions, and we have 6 participants. For personal reasons, Luis Coix cannot be present, so I introduce our first speaker without delay. Professor Pierluigi Sacco is a special advisor of the European Commissioner for Education and Culture. Thank you for joining us. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Only for the sake of precision, I've been the special advisor in the past commission, so it was finished with the term of the present one. But of course, there is still lots of collaboration with the commission, and I am very happy to be able to speak at this panel, because I think that especially in a moment like this, higher education institutions can really have a crucial, pivotal role in culture-led development processes, and I'll try to explain why. So the key reference in this regard, I think it's a very important document that has been published by the European Commission in spring 2018, which is the new European Agenda for Culture. I was at the time I was in the cabinet of the commissioner, and I participated directly to the elaboration of this document, and I can say that with pride and satisfaction that this is really becoming a reference document, not only in terms of vision, but more and more also in terms of concrete choices. So, for example, now the up and coming work program of the first round of Horizon Europe calls, for example, clearly reflects this particular philosophy. What is the philosophy and why it is important for higher education institutions? The philosophy is, for the first time, considering culture as a source of impact, not in the obvious ways. Generally, when we think of the impact of culture, we tend to think of the economic impact. And that, of course, it's important, but it's also very instrumental. Because generally, the division that emerges is that everything that has, let's say, some specific reflection in economic activity is also relevant, but something that is not that relevant. So, for example, all the institutions that need subsidization to function, like, for example, museums, like theaters, like libraries, are seen as a liability in some sense, rather than as an asset, if this is the definition. But what we are learning increasingly is that the really transformational role of culture is about changes in behavior. Culture is very much about creating new attitudes towards issues that are clearly focal societal challenges for Europe and more generally for the humankind. Let's make an example. We today are, of course, very concerned about climate change. And we understand that climate change, of course, is very much about lots of things that are very complicated and in some sense fly over our head. But there are other things that are clearly and crucially connected to our everyday behaviors. Think, for example, of how good we are at waste recycling, or how responsible we are towards certain choices in which we can drastically reduce our ecological footprint. So from this point of view, how can culture make the difference? Well, the point is that we know today that people with relatively high levels of cultural participation tend to be more sensitive towards pro-social and culturally responsible, socially responsible behaviors as far as the environment is concerned. For example, the effectiveness of waste recycling is much better in people with high levels of cultural participation than in people with relatively low levels. And you could think, but that's not culture. Is that there are, of course, variables like education and income that are correlated to culture. But we are already discounting for this. So we are able to say that it's exactly the role of culture that clearly gives people a different attitude towards everyday decisions that makes the difference. Actually, the European Agenda for Culture points out three particular pillars for what they call cultural crossovers. So they explicitly use a biological metaphor to indicate that the impact of culture on different non-cultural spheres is not just something unintentional that just can happen out of a serendipity, what is generally termed spillover in terms of economic terminology. But by crossover, it's clearly meant that this is designed, that this is intentional. And this is constitutional because exactly like the crossover is at the basis of genetic reproduction, in some sense, the cultural crossover can really be at the basis of a resilience strategy for Europe towards very important societal challenges. So what are the three areas that have been singled out by the new European Agenda for Culture? Or I should say 3+1. One area is health and well-being. And clearly in the post-pandemic scenario, this is very important. And I know that the panel immediately after this is exactly on health and well-being. So I will not elaborate more on that. But this is clearly becoming a crucial policy theme, not only at the European level. The second area is social cohesion, where clearly culture can make an enormous difference, and not only in terms of intercultural dialogue, but also, for example, in terms of reintegration of fragile or minority people or people coming from dysfunctional social environments. And then there is innovation, in which the relationship with culture is clearly crucial in terms of creating a mind orientation towards embracing new ideas, not being scared by new ideas. And again, we have an increasing evidence that culture is making a difference in this regard. Then there is the +1. The +1 is education. Clearly, there is a crossover between culture and education. This is nothing new. But especially now in the post-pandemic scenario and in the formidable development of digital platforms, clearly the relationships between culture and education become crucial. And let's start from here. Clearly, in the case of higher education institutions, this is where we can really make the difference. Not simply in terms of, let's say, fixing holes, fixing problems that are related to, for example, teaching at a distance with all the issues with social disconnection of students and so on and so forth, but also in terms of experimenting new models and creating new possibilities of complementarity, for example, with what is happening in terms of cultural experimentation. For example, the use of cutting-edge new technologies from this point of view is getting increasing momentum and will become increasingly important in the future. But think also of the other ones. Think, for example, of all the emphasis that has been put on higher education institutions in regional innovation chains, for example, how this element is important. And in particular, the fact that if it is about orientation, social behaviors, higher education institutions are literally laboratories in which you can foster this kind of attitude. In some sense, it's called third mission of universities today, is very much about that. And we have to start from our students in the first place. So cultural participation is something that has to be cultivated in higher education institutions themselves. And then there is another element which is extremely important and where we can really play a role that can make a difference. Behavioral change is something that cannot be measured or even monitored through traditional tools. So we have now tools, for example, to carry out conventional economic impact analysis. But what about social change? What about behavioral change? So it's very much about creating new forms of collaboration between behavioral sciences, social and cognitive psychology, increasingly neuroscience. And this is very much about developing new methodologies, new indicators to monitor and measure this kind of change. So for example, in terms of the impact on mental health from cultural participation in a lockdown situation, a classical problem that we are facing now. And for example, how this has impacted on our own students in the first place and more generally on territorial stakeholders, depending on the kind of learning platform or the kind of interaction that we have developed as a solution to the current problem. These issues make an enormous difference. And if there is a center of competence in which we can really offer to the whole of society all the skills and the experience that is needed to develop these new methodologies for monitoring and for impact, that's higher education institutions. So what I'm saying is that the new framework of the new European Agenda for Culture, I think that there is an enormous, still untapped space for higher education institutions in many different respects. But the point is that we need to take culture more seriously. And this is where I think there are still gaps, because we tend to think, again, of culture as something that is related to, let's say, leisure or free time. And so in the end, it's not really something that has to do with the basic challenges that we have to face. But what we are learning increasingly today from cognitive science and especially social neuroscience is that this very fact that culture has to do with learning very complex, sophisticated cognitive and social skills in low risk situations, in low stakes situations, is what makes them so robust. So the reason why, for example, we witness at the European level such a striking relationship between levels of cultural participation and life expectation, innovation, performance of educational systems, and so on and so forth, is not a fortuitous effect. It's something that derives from clearly unleashing the potential of culture as a platform for skill development at a societal level. The point is how higher education institutions are able to position themselves as crucial hubs for this particular perspective. At the moment, not so well. At the moment, we have been somehow missing from the picture in terms of, as I said, different strategic priorities. But this moment, the moment in which we are witnessing the launch of the new structural funds programming, the moment in which we are witnessing the launch of the new Horizon Europe programming, and of course, of all the other relevant European programs, is the moment. So I think that this is also the moment to imagine new alliances, EU-wide alliances of universities and research centers and higher education institutions to really tap into this opportunity and to create stable partnerships to develop this incredible potential that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your thank you for your excellent contribution to the debate of on these important issues, and for remind us the new agenda for culture, key issues and challenges for the relation between education and culture. Let me now introduce our next speaker, Maria Chiara Exposito, who is seconded national expert for the education for the European Commission. Thank you for joining us. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation and for giving me the screen. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, particularly because I feel a little bit in between two words that are the essential entities and realities that the topic of today's panel is trying to connect, which is the cultural world, and more specifically, if I'm not wrong, this panel is really very much about arts as a driver of development, and the world of the institutions, and particularly the regional communities. So I also would like to mention the fact that I represent now the Commission and DG Education and Culture, and particularly the unit which is in charge of cultural policies. But as you mentioned, I'm a seconded national expert, and I started my task recently coming from a regional government. So that's why I feel particularly involved and happy to be be part of this discussion because I have really seen the experience of institutional policies fostering cultural participation at local level, at community level, and I'm now experiencing in a strong connection with some of the topics that Pierluigi has just mentioned, what is the result and what is being developed also as a consequence of the initiatives that started, particularly on the European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018, and that gave birth to the new European Agenda for Culture that strives let's say, the new principles and the cross-cutting approach and mainstreaming approach to culture in many, many policies. So what is important to look at now is how, although it's still very difficult to see, let's say, the consequence and the impact of this at community and at regional level, where everything happens in terms of involving the artistic components, the cultural sector, the creative professionals, in order to materialize, let's say, the efforts that have been pushed forward since a number of years and more at the European level to mainstream the importance of culture across other policies, we can start really now to realize how much the sector, also in terms of networks, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of community platforms that happen on the ground, have integrated this notion that culture should not be seen only as an economic asset and not only as a driver for economic development. So I think it's really important to look at a two-ways approach where we can more and more, starting with the existing new programs and with the result of this mainstream approach, identify a number of opportunities and a number of, let's say, boxes that are both at the level of European programs such as Horizon Europe, as Creative Europe, as Erasmus+, that are managed by the Commission, but also in the hands of regional policymakers and local authorities, and that derive from this new framework of the European action and from this scenario of interconnecting policies. So we have to look more and more at how regional levels can implement the new cohesion funds, the new perspectives of the policy priorities that are now there, where culture has been more present, is more integrated, and although there are still many, of course, limitations and lacks of perception of how these opportunities can be leveraged to favor and to facilitate the artistic and the cultural collaborations with higher education institutions, with stakeholders and with citizens, there are more tools, there are more strategies, and especially there is a different cultural mentality in the playground, where all, let's say, the creative professionals interplay with each other, and especially in the field of producing innovation. So I think that it could be useful to take this two-ways approach, and also to think in terms of, let's say, both perspectives of this two-way approach. One, the perspective of arts as a component of innovation from a policy-making point of view, and on the other side, art as a component of culture, of cultural heritage assets, to be exploited, I would say, to really be looked at as an important asset on which to invest. And this is where we can see, for example, the evolution of a number of projects and initiatives where universities and artistic organizations, and particularly in the field of performing arts, in the field of visual arts, in the field of also arts in terms of educational vector across training programs, has been pushed forward thanks to EU funds. One first specific initiative that I would like to mention that proves, let's say, this two-ways approach is a recent call that was launched during the COVID crisis under Erasmus+, and that was aimed to find, with the specific title of Partnerships for Creativity, collaborations between higher education institutions, but not just universities, also vocational training institutes and educational organizations, to work with artists and to work with cultural stakeholders to improve the way the art pedagogy is taught at school, and also to use different cultural models, so really proper role models from the cultural sector, as I said, in the field of theater, in the field of music, in the field of sculpture and visual arts, to be used as an inspiration for creativity learning, for learning new skills. And this is really a driving lesson because a number of projects have been approved under this call for about 1 million euros, that in an emergency situation, also to support the cultural sector in the COVID crisis, was launched under this European scenario of the current Erasmus+. And this will also be an inspirational methodology for the new Erasmus+, which has just been published for the new 7 years of the European Commission planning. In parallel, other initiatives have been promoted, particularly by our DG of Education and Culture, but the Unit of Cultural Policies. And I would like to mention another one, which is called Cultural Heritage in Action, which is a policy peer learning initiatives targeted to cities and to regional authorities, but also to regional cultural stakeholders, such as museums, libraries, archaeology and heritage sites in open space. So all sorts of heritage organizations cooperating with creativity and cultural industries. So another important perspective to look at arts for its contribution to development for regeneration of communities is this, let's say, inner cross-sector collaboration within the cultural world, where cultural heritage is on one side, and on the other side, you have the creative industries. So it's really two arms of the same fight, I would like to stress. And it's really also a new target of programs of research and educational programs that will be funded with opportunities, specific opportunities under Horizon Europe and under the European Innovation and Technology Institute. Particularly under Horizon Europe, there will be a specific cluster dedicated to culture, creativity, and cultural heritage, which will fund research projects where specifically researchers, together with cultural heritage managers, professionals, and creativity and cultural industries representatives at local level, but also at national level, can cooperate to present new, let's say, interdisciplinary collaborations to explore, for example, this new contribution that culture and arts brings to development, both in terms of innovation and in terms of the big political priorities that are driving the main strategies of the European scenario, both at national and European level. And I'm talking about the Green Deal, about the digital transition, about the recovery and resilience facility plan in general. So under Horizon Europe, this cluster will encourage creative collaborations, but also research-oriented collaborations that produce process, methodological, technological innovations that can be applied to the cultural heritage sector, thanks to the contribution also of the creative industries. So it's really, again, a two-way world where academia on one side and the professional world, the creative businesses and the cultural heritage managers can explore these new windows for opportunity under these big principles that are again driven from the original new agenda for culture, and also under the big framework of the work plan for culture, which is established for 4 years at European level by the member states. And within this policy dialogue that happens between Europe and the local communities through a number of filters that are those that participate into EU projects and that form partnerships, platforms, and networks, we should also bear in mind a number of relevant advocacy, recent initiatives that foster more and more the relevance of art in its dimension of contributing to sustainable development, which is another very specific way of looking at development in Europe through the big effort that many organizations at local level for urban regeneration, linked to fighting climate change, linked to fighting against poverty, linked to fighting for social inclusion, are dealing with showcasing how culture is fundamental to integrate the national strategies for sustainable development and to achieve truly the sustainable development goals that are there and that have to do with both economic and social issues. And the third dimension, of course, of the environmental scenario. So we're really seeing how art and culture are crucial to all these sort of components of development. And the third element that I would like to mention in terms of opportunities and initiatives that have been launched by Europe and that are also developed at the level of regional communities and universities and centers is in the field of skills cooperation. So we are looking at how much the increased needs for emerging skills, but also for new skills that will have to deal with the recovery and with the relaunch of arts and of the sector of culture after the COVID crisis and during the COVID crisis really needs to be integrated in this big digital transition that is there since a while and that is taking more and more momentum in a scenario where we need to see how, let's say, living experiences and living heritage that happens through cultural production in common spaces where people want to enjoy culture together can coexist with the provision of new content through digital environments. And this is where the matching between digital skills, traditional skills, and soft skills from the cultural and creative sectors with also the big professions that are typical to the cultural heritage have to liaise with each other. And Europe is fundamental in this process because there are existing, let's say, containers that allow this cooperation to happen. And I would like to mention on one side the Pact for Skills, that is a strategy that Europe has developed in a number of sectors and is growing in the different ecosystems, including the cultural and creative one. And on the other side, a very specific initiative, which is called Blueprint for Sectorial Skills Alliances, which is also funded by the European Union, and that has promoted a project called Charter, which has just started at the beginning of 2021 and that will continue for 4 years, working with 21 partners from across European member states, gathering institutions, regions, universities, centers for training, and a number of research organizations that work together to develop a strategy for new skills in the cultural heritage sector. And the objective is really to identify new modules and new ways to approach, for example, master programs, PhD, high-level skills development for the future of the market needs. So the employment sector will really need different kind of profiles in the culture, also in the artistic capacity to merge, let's say, creativity with working on projects and with working on capacity, for example, to sustainable funding, a number of transversal skills that are more and more needed in the cultural heritage sector. And this is also done through contribution from Europe, together with the participation of course, a co-financing from ministries at national level, as well as regional authorities. And this particular project has also the objective to, let's say, create an environment where also future universities and research centers that are not specifically in the existing consortium that has been created by this winning application will interact with this kind of alliance that the project aims to establish for giving a number of entry points to the creative sector and to the cultural heritage professionals of the future to have an opportunity to increase their skills capacity. Just my last message on this, a number of platforms on culture and creativity are being developed at European level, and one very particular and important cluster will also be funded by, as I said before, the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, which will launch a call at the end of April called Knowledge and Innovation Community for Cultural and Creative Sectors and Industries, which will have a big budget and will be open to all European stakeholders of the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria Chiara Esposito, for bringing to us the regional, local, and the community point of view, and the financial European programs opportunities. Thank you very much. The next presentation is by João Teixeira Lopes. He is the president of the Portuguese Association of Sociology. Thank you, João. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank University of Porto for this invitation, and I would also like to greet all the participants in this panel. All my life, I've been working in research in the field of cultural policies and cultural practices. Nowadays, I belong to a network, the European Network of Observatories in the Field of Arts and Culture, INO, and I'm also engaged in a 2020 project, Uncharted project, which is studying now the emergence of cultural values in our societies. So, as a sociologist, I would like to think with you and with us about two research questions. The first research question is community. Our panel today is art as a driver for community development. I remember, first of all, I remember the concept of a sociologist, Anne Swidler, many years ago in last century. She said that culture is a toolkit. Culture or art as a toolkit. In fact, that means that culture and art are repertoires, a set of repertoires, and a set of, how can I say, of rituals and ways of giving sense to our daily existence. So as a resource, as a toolkit, we can find in culture and art key tools for understanding our common existence and for giving sense to our daily life. But first of all, I'd like to question the notion of community. I think we should start from a concept of a community as something heterogeneous in post-colonial societies. Communities don't have fixed boundaries, and they have heterogeneity inside it. So a community is a system of relationships where class counts, where gender, ethnical differences, age differences are so important. That's why when speaking about communities, we must also speak about politics of justice and politics of identity, politics of equality and politics of recognition. That's important because, and that's my second issue, many times when speaking about these questions, culture and art as resources, as a driver for social cohesion, development, social integration, well-being, self-esteem, leisure time, etc., we often forget what is a cultural participant. What are cultural participants? How can we conceptualize them? I'd like to say that cultural participants, in this sense of community, are publics in action. They are not audiences. They are not customers. They are publics engaged of doing and performing culture. And that's a big difference. We must somehow pay attention to their dispositions. Pierluigi spoke about the importance of neurosciences. I agree. Social dispositions somehow connect sociology and neurosciences, because dispositions are structured, systematic ways through socialization that can explain our ways of understanding the world, understanding the relation to others, and also our ways of liking and disliking. And we must understand if communities are contexts that activate or instead deactivate those dispositions. Are they milieu of activating or deactivating dispositions? Can publics code or encode cultural messages in those contexts? Because, and that's I think very important, if we study publics in action, we will understand the relations, the modes of relations between people and culture. Somehow I'm speaking about cultural reception, and cultural reception is more than an audience issue. It is a way of producing culture. How do cultural participants in their reception modes produce meaning and produce culture, even if they don't create artifacts, even if they are giving sense to their daily life, to their daily routines, to their worldviews? We must keep an eye on those processes, doing a critical ethnography. What is a critical ethnography? It is a way of understanding the semiotic power of people. Instead of asking how participants are stimulated by objects, we also ask how objects and contexts and communities can stimulate participants. Instead of looking to participants as cultural dopes, we can understand the reflexive circulation of meaning, the intersubjectivity processes, and also their projects and their strategies. If we do so, we can embrace those issues of community development. Publics in action have got a structure of feeling, and many times we don't understand that question because we only want to understand statistical regularities or statistical trends, and we not deep our research in those terms. So I would say that if we want to pay attention to community processes and how people engage in those processes and how art and culture can be a driver for community development, we must see publics as strangers that become less strange because they are publics, because they exchange meaning, and because they have the possibility in those contexts of exchanging. So how can we create contexts of exchanging? Or how can we create contexts of activating codes and activating action? That's, I think, the key question. Communities must be understood as public spheres, not only based on consuming or superficial connections. A public sphere means that there is a rational dialogue, a critical rationality, and also a poetic of verbal and body language, a poetic that is the basis of that semiotic power that so many times we forgot when we are developing public policies. And that's why I would like to emphasize this need of doing ethnography, understanding the meanings of cultural participants in action, and seeing them as active, not passive, and as something more than a marketing issue. Something more than the marketing issue. Because European public policies, yes, they have been understanding culture as a resource and as a toolkit, but many times inside the paradigm of an instrumental paradigm of conceiving people as audiences. And somehow, if we conceive participants as publics in action, we would also have the possibility of inventing new languages and transforming the way people engage into communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, João, for bringing us your sociological perspective, sometimes in dialogue with economic perspectives, and the notions about the community and the participation issues, in particular the notion of publics and in action, and the methodologies to analyze the publics. So it's my pleasure now to give the screen to our next panelist, Professor Nuno Crespo, is director of the School of Arts, the Universidade Católica Portuguesa in Porto. The screen is yours. Thank you for joining us.
So much. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Fátima Vieira and Paulo Pires Duval for the kind invitation to be here and make this presentation. And I would like to state that due to time limitation, I will try to make my argument as simple, as direct as possible. So I won't elaborate much and will only share with you the work we have been developing in the past 3 years here at the School of Art. So I won't engage in discussions about the European policies and so on. So I will try to present our case as a study case for these questions that our panel raises. This means that I won't be speaking as a curator or as an art critic or as a philosopher working on the field of art, which is my work of research, but as the Dean of the School of Arts from the Universidade Católica Portuguesa. The project about which I am about to give you a glimpse is the new strategy adopted by this school in the past 3 years. And the challenges we have been facing deal mainly with the fact of being an art school inside the big university, where big in terms of what are not the public universities here in Portugal, where law and business schools are the biggest areas. But also, I will try to highlight that our challenges relate also to how can teaching art in the context of university rules be cultural and artistic relevant, significant and recognized not only by the academy, but also by those who make part of what we can call the art scene or the cultural milieu. And we came to the conclusion that we wanted to build a school that could work outside itself, creating conditions for the knowledge that we produce inside our walls could transverse the school walls, expanding itself into the city, forming new communities and rehearsing new ways of living together. So I will share just a quick presentation that I have prepared to share with you. Along our commitment with our students in terms of talent creation and skill development, we wish to create value to the university as a whole, and also to the regional, national, and European cultural context. All of this is especially relevant in these our times when we start to allow ourselves to think in post-pandemic Europe. What will we be? What will we have? What symbolic values will remain? The recent manifesto about the Cultural New Deal for Europe, signed by so many artists, intellectuals, politicians, show us how urgent this reflection is. Coming back to our project, our work has been to find the right balance between academic training in the field of arts and new technologies and ambitioning cultural and artistic relevance, as I stated. And this was it was this need that made us rebuild this school, a school that has almost 25 years, around an idea. And from that reflexive process, we found a simple, straightforward concept as our motto: the school as a creative community. And this definition of the school as, or this idea of the school as a creative community, it is what has been guiding our options, and that is on the head of our strategy. I will skip more practical topics on how we lend equipment, help alumni, and open our facilities and technical staff to help artists to develop their projects using the school as their own studio and as a production platform. On what follows, I will be focusing on our main projects and our core ideas. So this creative community that we promote and that we encourage and that we think that we are creating follows from this strong idea of art as a driver for community, but also has been built around this idea of a school with no walls, open to the city, and defining ourselves as a space where new communities are created. Without imposing epistemological or creative models, we promote as a school the contact with different ways of thinking, understanding, and making art. And our strategy, besides the pedagogical models that we have been developing and all of those questions that we have to deal with inside the university, has been developed mainly through these 3 points: a strategy of visiting artists and artistic residencies, a strong independent exhibition program, and with this idea of blending our work with the art scene. In terms of artistic residencies, we have developed this strategy as a way to intensify the dialogue of our students with artists that are working in the field where our students aim to work. And this allows us to intensify a dialogue in a non-hierarchical way. So our students engage in discussions and relations with people that are not their teachers, that won't grade them, with whom they don't have a power relation. And this, not only this non-hierarchical way of working seems to us very interesting, but also this allows us to promote contact with differentiated artistic models, which our students can accept and imitate or criticize and destroy. Of course, there would be much to say about how can an artist learn to be an artist and so on, but this informal way of teaching is very interesting and important to us. These videos show some of those projects, also some of our guests visiting artists these 2 years. Very interesting, this program of visiting artists has been developed with the city of Porto, through a program they have called In Residence, and also with the Gulbenkian Foundation that has been sponsoring this program. These artistic residencies allows us to bring international and national artists, and we ask these artists to produce an exhibition at the end of their stay with us. So our exhibition program, where we don't include works produced by our own students, is strongly independent, international, and cross-disciplinary. Being an art school that has new technologies at its core, we have been developing projects mainly in photography, cinema, digital art, new media arts, and etc. This exhibition program that we produce entirely inside the school allows a widespread participation of all the students. It's a voluntary participation, not a mandatory thing to participate in those projects, is allowing them not only to build their personal CV, but also to enlarge their networking. This, of course, is only possible because we understand artistic practice and we assume artistic practice as a research. And recently, in order to somehow systematize this idea of artistic practice as research, we have been publishing a book collection in a partnership with the local and international publisher about these projects. So one last aspect is this idea of blending with the art scene. This means that our artistic and scientific agenda that is in the center of our pedagogical and scientific project involves local institutions and contributes to the regeneration of communities and promotes and develops these feelings of belonging. We have been working with the local museums, national museums, and other institutions as long as, I don't know if you know, but Porto has two very important film festivals with which we have been working together. So we have been working, for instance, with museums such as Serralves, the contemporary museum from the Serralves Foundation, but also with the Museu da Misericórdia, as you can see on the small video. Another event that we promote each year in order to open the school to the local community and put the school inside in the city is the Porto Summer School in Art and Cinema, that besides all the workshops that we promote with guests and teachers coming from several geographies, disciplinary contexts, etc., we offer to the city a strong cultural program such as screening of films, performances, artist lectures, and so on. But what is interesting in this program is that we offer to the city this 1 week, these 7 days of cultural program, but that we each year we make it in several spaces of the city. So we have activities in the local theater, in Serralves museums, in gardens, etc. And this allows us to use this to allow us to define that for us, art is not just a word we use in order to ornament economic development, but it's the name we give to a field of work where new forms of knowledge are produced and new ways of living together are rehearsed. And so art as a driver for a community is for us a very special concept and idea that we develop not only inside our classrooms, but also through this artistic and cultural program. And so I hope I have been that I haven't exceeded my time limit. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And for bringing us the teaching context of arts and culture in a creative community and art scene, and again, the intrinsic value of culture and not only instrumental. So the next intervention is by Tina Delve. She is Deputy Head of Unit, Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. The screen is your, thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. I'm actually delighted to be here and to explore the intersections between the arts and the higher education, and to discuss with you how we can really advance community and regional engagements in this respect. Disciplines like architecture, design, and applied arts in general are often coupled with technological developments that can have a huge impact on our societies. And of course, there's also impacts not only into people's lives, but also into our economies. The cultural and creative sectors have around a yearly turnover of around 440 billion euros in the European Union, and they are around 4.2% of the GDP. And in 2019, they have provided more than 7 million jobs across the Union. And this is undoubtedly partly due to the emphasis culture has played historically in higher education, because culture, creativity, and critical thinking have undoubtedly shaped the European talent pool, thanks to the university and the higher education sector at large. And of course, this is crucial for Europe's regions and communities to further develop. At the European level, we are helping culture and higher education work together, really for the benefits of Europe's regions and communities. First, we are supporting universities as a vehicle of culture, as catalysts for creative and critical thinking. For example, through Erasmus Plus and the Creative Europe programs and the Horizon program, and also through our policies. And secondly, we are leveraging the arts to enrich our learners' growth and development in higher education. And for this, we are promoting an interdisciplinary approach. Let me come back to this first point on the support to the higher education sector. The higher education sector is currently undergoing really a profound transformation, not only due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course also due to the structural changes that are already ongoing. The European Commission has set in motion several important pieces of the policy agenda. For example, think about the European education area, the revitalized European research area, the digital education action plan, and we have heard already before on the culture field. And together with the support of the Erasmus, the Horizon, and the Creative Europe programs, these are really helping the higher education sector to become more innovative and more creative. And let me take one of the examples that bring all these elements together, which is the European Universities initiative. European universities are actually selected under Erasmus Plus and also supported under the Horizon program. And they're actually ambitious transnational alliances of higher education institutions that are developing long-term structural and strategic cooperation. And they work together with key local and regional actors, sometimes from the public sector, but also from the private sector and from the civil society parts. And this also includes the arts and the cultural sector. Many of the selected European universities work together with art centers, with musea, with libraries, with media production firms, and other parts of the creative industries. And they actually work on a challenge-based approach, meaning that they are working together to tackle societal challenges through European knowledge co-creating teams. What does this mean? With this, we actually mean that they put together all the actors at the regional and European level, going from students to researchers to academics, businesses, civil society, including also the cultural sector. And they're trying to find solutions for these societal challenges in a multidisciplinary approach to also reinforce the links of their work with the regional and the local communities. And often they bring together the sciences and the arts for this purpose. European universities also have a markedly European focus, promoting the foundational values of the European Union, fostering a shared sense of belonging and embracing diversity. As such, they really aim to bring together a new generation of Europeans that are equipped with the skills for the future to become really the citizens of the future. The aim is really that they can work across cultures, across borders, in different languages, and across sectors and academic disciplines, and all for the benefits for further community and regional development. One of the examples of such a European university is, for example, the EU for Arts European University. It's an alliance bringing together 4 higher education institutions devoted to the fine arts. They come from Budapest, Dresden, Rome, and Riga. And together they are developing common flexible curricula in the fields of painting, sculpture, and graphic arts. And these new curricula are based on an interdisciplinary and international approach. And the aim is, as for the other European universities alliances, that their work can serve as a model that can also be used by other universities in the different regions across Europe, so that more regions and more learners can benefit from their experiences. Then to come back to my second point that I raised, the importance of interdisciplinarity. We do live in an interconnected world, and we do understand there are so many different challenges, and we cannot only look at it from one discipline, as otherwise we cannot sufficiently make informed decisions. This is, for example, true for the STEM fields, which are increasingly important to our political decisions. But yet we cannot simply rely on only specialized workers to come forward with solutions. Although their expertise is really valuable, of course, we need to place it in different contexts. So the fields of expertise become much more relevant if we see the potential to go beyond abstract equations and see the potential material impacts in people's life. So this is where that we can all gain from interdisciplinarity, and STEM fields have a lot to gain from integrating the arts into their curricula. This is why we are really trying to boost what we call the STEAM, so really integrating arts into the STEM fields. And through the study of arts, music, literature, history, and other humanity and social sciences, we really aim to develop the creativity to come up with new solutions and to better understand the challenges we are facing. This will also create more depth and versatility in our changing job markets, and also helping our graduates to really develop the soft skills they need also to listen to each other and to find win-win solutions. Again, a crucial aspect for Europe's regional and community development. As I see that time is running fast, I will stop here. So far, my insights on the topic. I'm happy to pass the floor back to the moderator and to listen to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and for remember us the importance of the creative and the cultural sectors to achieve the objective of this discussion in this panel, and the relation between European universities and cultural institutions. and the reminder as the importance of the multidisciplinarity and the soft skills. Thank you for your short time in your intervention. And the next presentation is by Professor Nuno Jardim Nunes, who is president of the Interactive Technologies Institute, Técnico University of Lisbon. Thank you for joining us. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the invitation from Professor Fátima Vieira to be here and to give my testimony. I am a computer scientist and an engineer, so it's kind of weird that I'm here speaking, but in the last 15 years, I've founded and directed the Interactive Technologies Institute that started in Madeira and then moved on to Lisbon when I moved there to Técnico. And it was one of the first research institutes that was trying to tackle the very interdisciplinary area of research, which didn't have a strong tradition in Portugal, which is human-computer interaction. And this goes by, I found this relevant because, not only because that's probably the reason why I'm here, but also because when I was listening to Pierluigi, I was thinking about exactly what challenged me to look into this area. Is the fact that in the turn of the century, when I graduated and I started my PhD, the computing technology that I was trained for had changed significantly. It was no longer a new technology; it was an established technology. And once you have an established technology, what becomes more relevant is not necessarily the engineering, but much more what we typically call the soft areas like design and now more and more the social, the psycho, the behavior sciences and the cultural areas. And what you've seen in the last 20 years, and I think that's part of the success of our research center, is the fact that we've perhaps earlier than many more, we acknowledged the need to integrate in our research community people coming from the social areas, from psychology, from design, from art, from digital humanities. And we have been quite successful in welcoming these people in our research area and trying to make them contribute to our research agenda and to get competitive funding, which we actually have been quite successful. And this is all inside an engineering school, inside the robotics and engineering national laboratory. And so we have always also been quite successful, I think, in trying to explain to our colleagues in engineering, in mechanical engineering, in electrical engineering, not only in computer science, the importance of having art, design, and humanities contributing to the research agenda of an engineering research unit. And so, again, the beginning and the importance of answering the question, not what can you do with technology, but what should you do with technology, is very central to our agenda. And it's been something that has been inspiring our path in the last 15 years. The second thing is, what are the barriers that I've personally witnessed and I see from the national, regional, national, and European levels in order to push an agenda like this? One of the main barriers is, how can you develop an academic career that will integrate these people coming from different disciplines inside a much more structured silo organization like a typical engineering school or a typical science and technology school? It's very hard. It's very hard to find careers for people that are not core engineering faculty and that are bringing many times more money than some of the engineers that are very well published in some venues once they learn how to play the academic game. And that, I think, is one of the biggest barriers. It's the EU has been pushing for this agenda of funding the connection with the creative and side with a more scientific and engineering side of things. And I think that's the right direction to go. But it's in order to really promote a cultural change inside our academic system, I think we need to radically change the way we organize the careers, and we enable this this connection between the two areas and integrate people that are not from science and engineering in more traditional academic venues. So I think that's one big challenge that I've not been able to solve. We are trying to do that. But I can give you also some examples, concrete examples of projects, of initiatives that we have been involved and that I think are a good example of how successful this combination can be even for a traditional engineering school like the one I'm representing here. So I'm going to just show a few examples, concrete examples of things that I think reflect what I'm talking about. And I guess that you can see my screen. I hope that the screen is visible. Yeah, okay, thank you. One of the examples is actually in the energy domain, sustainability and energy domain. It actually won a European Innovation Award, and it's by my colleague James Odger, that then moved on to, is now at École in Paris. And it's a good example of how you could have a contribution from design and culture into the domain of sustainability. This was a project still happening in Madeira. Madeira, for those of you that don't know, is an island known for the steep cliffs and big changes in altitude. And our challenge here was to try to understand how we could communicate the importance of renewable energy to the local communities. And James came up with this idea of a gravity battery, which was a prototype, and the goal of this prototype was to make it possible that it would play a record of Johnny Cash by powering a record player. And in this project, the goal was not necessarily to show that you could create a gravity battery, a battery that will bring a weight up during the day when the renewable energy is available, and then bring the weight down during the night when the renewable energy is not available anymore, but rather to start a discussion with the local community that is very much integrated and knowledgeable about the importance of using these natural ways of storing energy, which is gravity. By the way, in Madeira Islands, a lot of the energy is stored with a big infrastructure that pumps water into the mountain and then turbinates the water down again. And so that's one of the most important ways of storing energy that you can find there. This project is a project done with reusable materials. It was designed to be a cultural project. It was a project that will be assembled by talking with the local communities and creating a dialogue with the local communities and making them aware of the importance of sustainability in their daily lives, and connecting also with the historical and cultural context of this island that for centuries had these paths of water bringing the water from the north to the south, more than 200 kilometers of these levadas known worldwide that will bring the water from the north to the south of the island. And by doing that, they will contribute amazingly to the sustainability, not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of agriculture, for instance. A second example is an example of actually an ongoing research project, which combines, again, technology with digital storytelling and cultural heritage. And I think is, again, a good example of the power of combining technologies with the humanities, with social inclusion. And this project has been rolling out in 3 pilots. And basically it tries to create digital technologies that enable populations that are at risk of inclusion, of social inclusion, through digital technologies and their stories, enable them to connect to the cultural, to the tangible and intangible cultural elements of the 3 different cities. The three pilots are happening in Lisbon, where we are, but also in Barcelona and in Paris. And with our partners, we are trying to create a tool that becomes a platform for these communities at risk of inclusion, mainly from foreign countries, non-European countries, to use digital technologies as a way to communicate and to reflect their own cultural heritage into the existing material cultural heritage of the places.
Nemex will be a tool to give voice to the unheard.
So again, MEMEX is a tool that we are trying to develop that will make this cultural heritage available to the disadvantaged communities, and through that, we expect that it can have a significant contribution and become an Instagram of the disadvantaged communities, migrant disadvantaged communities in many of the places in Europe. A third example is actually what I've been trying to contribute in my own school, which is the biggest engineering school in Portugal with more than 12,000 students, in the curriculum reform of engineering education in Técnico in Lisbon. I was proud to be part of the curriculum reform committee of Técnico. And one of the major things that we were able to introduce and to promote as a change was the fact that we made it mandatory, like in many other engineering schools throughout the world and some of the top engineering schools throughout the world, the fact that every engineering student should have some basic training in the humanities, the arts, because it's only through that engineering students will understand the ethical consequences of their work and understand the ethical limitations of their activity. And so I think this is again another interesting contribution of how cultural studies, how humanities can bring some change to the STEM students that I think it was Tina was mentioning before. And a final example is actually one of the latest projects that I've been involved, which relates to some kind of European funding, the new European Bauhaus movement, which again is an example of an initiative, a European-wide initiative that is trying to combine both areas of science and technology with the culture and the arts. And I was part of a group of authors that came up with this idea of a Bauhaus of the seas. How can we reinterpret the role of the Bauhaus, of the new European Bauhaus, by connecting this movement with one of or probably the most important frontier for sustainable development in the future, which are the seas. By the way, this website was developed in collaboration with several artists and one of the best designers, Portuguese designers, which is José Albergaria, who designed the beautiful aesthetics of the site. But our goal here was to really ask the question, what will be a new Bauhaus, and how can a new Bauhaus really influence a new aesthetical movement that will make us connect to the Green Deal and the need for contributing to a more sustainable European agenda. And we think that it's by looking at the areas where the most impact are, and one of these areas is clearly the horizons, and trying to use the technologies to create a better understanding of the environment around us, and what we call ecocentric design. This idea that we should no longer have the man in the center of the design process, but we should have non-human elements in the center of the design process. They could be waves, they could be beaches, they could be animals. And it's very important that we redesign our future, taking out this anthropocenic view of the future. And we believe that our vision is a way of asking people to reflect about that. The other one is reconciling people with their traditions, with their communities, because a lot of what we have been doing for centuries was actually quite sustainable. And it's very important that we reinforce this sense of community, that we make communities reconnect with their traditions, which are much more ecological and sustainable than the ones that we are imposing much more on a very Western way of thinking. And by doing that, we hope to renew practices, and by involving citizens with this post-anthropocenic vision that we want the Bauhaus of the seas to reflect on, and to be able to use that as a real movement that will create a new aesthetic. That aesthetic could have an impact in the urban, which is a lot of the focus of the new European Bauhaus movement. It could have an impact, certainly an impact in the new regeneration of urban spaces. But we think it's much more than that. And actually, we will launch very soon a series of posters of the cities where the boat of the new European Bauhaus is going to reach as non-fungible tokens. And that's the non-fungible token movement, the idea that you could have the creative communities exchanging their own creations through the crypto world is something that is an interesting element to discuss in terms of what could be a new aesthetics. And so we are trying to push that as a provocation of how you could use the new digital technologies to reflect on the impact of the cultural domains and the artistic domains and make them much more influential in engineering and science. Because as I started, I will finish, I am an engineer and I do need the input of people from cultural and humanities to be able to define my role as a designer, as a professor more. Thank you. I think I exceeded my time. Apologies.
Yes, thank you, Professor Nuno Jardim Nunes. We are running out of time, so we have to close the session. I thank you all very much in the name of the organization for your stimulating and enlightening contributions to the objective under discussion. Good afternoon to all. Stay safe. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have a 10 minutes break, but we'll be back soon.
Just in time.
O edifício histórico da Universidade do Porto situa-se na Praça de Gomes Teixeira, que homenageia o primeiro reitor desta universidade, mas popularmente é conhecida como Praça dos Leões, devido à fonte decorada por leões alados que nela pontua. Foi construído e remodelado ao longo de mais de um século, no lugar onde existiu o Colégio dos Meninos Órfãos, do Padre Baltasar Guedes, com a Igreja de Nossa Senhora da Graça. Neles estiveram instalados, e entre outras instituições de ensino superior antecedentes da Universidade, a Academia Real de Marinha e Comércio e a Academia Politécnica do Porto. Para a concretização da obra, contribuíram um município, a Companhia Geral da Agricultura das Vinhas do Alto Douro e as receitas do Imposto do Real do Vinho ou subsídio literário. A morosidade da edificação deveu-se às instabilidades políticas e económicas do país de 800 e à necessidade de adaptação das instalações às suas diversas funcionalidades. O primeiro projeto, de 1803, foi riscado por Costa e Silva, arquiteto neoclássico lisboeta. Nos anos seguintes, esse projeto inicial foi alterado pelo engenheiro-arquiteto Carlos Amarante, natural de Braga, que então trabalhava na transformação urbana da cidade. Na segunda metade do século XIX, foram gizados os últimos planos para o edifício, da autoria dos engenheiros Gonçalves de Sousa e Araújo e Silva. Contudo, as obras só vieram a ser concluídas em 1930. De raiz neoclássica, disposição horizontal e 5 pisos, o monumento alberga hoje a reitoria, a Casa Comum e suas galerias e o Museu de História Natural e da Ciência e ainda a Biblioteca do Fundo Antigo da Universidade do Porto. Na arcada que precede a entrada, sobressai o memorial evocativo dos alunos da Universidade mortos na Primeira Guerra Mundial, do ourives e escultor João da Silva, datado de 1948. No patamar de acesso ao piso nobre, assoma o busto do matemático e primeiro reitor, Francisco Gomes Teixeira, da autoria do escultor Teixeira Lopes. No piso nobre, ladeando a escadaria pétrea, podem contemplar-se 2 grandiosas pinturas a óleo, a matemática e as ciências físico-naturais, datadas de 1917 e assinadas por José Maria Veloso Salgado. Compõem-se de figuras alegóricas, maioritariamente femininas, dispostas em escadas, pórticos e tronos num estilo de pintura de cariz academista próprio do contexto artístico finissecular. O Salão Nobre, palco dos atos mais solenes da Universidade do Porto, dispõe 50 retratos. 3 deles representam os professores da Academia Real de Marinha e Comércio, da Academia Politécnica e da Universidade do Porto. Respectivamente, o Príncipe Regente, futuro Dom João VI, o Ministro do Reino, Passos Manuel, e o Presidente da República, António José de Almeida, pintados por Domingos Sequeira, Francisco José Rezende e Otávio Sérgio. As demais telas representam antigos diretores da Academia Real, antigos professores e diretores da Academia Politécnica e também da Faculdade de Ciências. E ainda Leopoldina Ferreira Paulo, a primeira mulher doutorada pela Universidade do Porto em 1944. São obras de artistas associados à história do ensino das belas artes na cidade, enquadradas esteticamente entre o neoclassicismo, o romantismo, o naturalismo e a arte contemporânea. Dos cerca de 20 artistas que trabalharam nesta galeria, apenas um não tem formação académica na área. Trata-se de Abel Salazar, cientista, pedagogo, escritor e artista, autor dos retratos do botânico Gonçalo Sampaio e do matemático Duarte Leite. Na sala do Conselho, contígua, apresentam-se os retratos dos primeiros 19 reitores da Universidade e uma água marinha do diplomata e pintor brasileiro Navarro da Costa, oferecida à Universidade pela Câmara do Porto em 1919.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the 7th panel and the final panel of these two very interesting days of discussions. The panel deals with arts, health, and well-being. We have a series of very interesting guests who will make very short presentations, but hopefully also very interesting presentations. So without further delay, we will start with someone from Brazil, Fernando Mencarelli. He is a professor, an artistic director, a researcher on the topic, and I'm sure we will be delighted to hear what he has to say. Fernando.
Okay. Thank you, Isabel. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this invitation, and congratulations to the organizers of University of Porto and the Portuguese National Plan for the Arts, especially Fátima Vieira and Paulo Pires do Vale. I will talk about transversalities of cultures and the arts in the universities, policies, territories, and epistemic plurality. What I intended to share here are some principles and practices from our cultural policy in relation to the general theme and the theme of this panel, but particularly in social approach. At this time of profound transformations, we need to recognize that the multiple crises in which we are immersed are also, and perhaps primarily, a cultural crisis. And it should be noted that I'm speaking from Brazil. The answers we provide or do not provide to this deep crisis are drawn from our values, ways of living and thinking, and are woven into the field of culture. In our agenda, the right to life comes first, but it is also necessary that the right to culture is guaranteed, and that we recognize the university as a cultural institution, and that the artistic cultural field as a fundamental part in the production of knowledge, in strategic planning, and in the actions that will enable us to surmount this moment reinforced by the blueprint for democracy and social justice. One of the principles of our Cultural Action Board is the understanding and practice of culture in its transversal dimension. Transversal in the interaction with the public entities. Transversal in its interaction with the various urban, rural, and peripheral territories. Transversal in affirming the university as a place of plural knowledge and as a pluri-epistemic territory. But the most important change underway is the full insertion of the arts and other cultural forms in the academic projects, and the recognition of its transversal dimension in all areas, whether teaching, extension, research, policy for students, innovation. We believe that the contemporary university will be a place to promote health and well-being to the extent that it becomes a place that mobilizes its entire community for answers to contemporary challenges. The field of culture and of the arts has much to contribute towards an understanding of our impasses. This way, the intersection between science, culture, and art is made broader as their horizons widen towards our great challenge. Arts are integrated to the transdisciplinary academic project, sharing its multiple dimensions: intellectual, corporeal, sensible, and collective. The arts have a fundamental role in transforming the values that govern our way of life. Our university is already a place for the richness of arts and knowledge. But besides that, it's also a place also for the sophisticated cultural knowledge from urban movements, rural communities, traditional peoples, the origin of a large part of our students. The knowledge from their engagement with other economies, other sociabilities, other ecologies, in which the art dimension is part of the way of life and view of the world integrated. The biggest challenge of all, the ecological one, is both the consequence and matrix of successive crises. Indigenous knowledge and knowledge from the African matrix teach us that there is no way to live well in a world in which culture and nature are not integrated. The buen vivir, living well, proposed by the indigenous peoples of the Andes, involves this ecological comprehension as a fundamental condition. We can think in this concept as a collective well-being. And here I quote Eduardo Gutierrez, that calls for a new ethics that balances quality of life, democratization of the state, and concern with biocentric ideals. End of quote. It also calls for a rethinking of the sense and values of education. I will talk now about some examples related with the principles represented here. Besides the work on a rich cultural environment with many museums and cultural centers and on a multiple arts projects in the university. The first project is Cultural Emotions and Creative Process Transversal Education. It started in 2016 with the aim of investing in the cultural, artistic, civic awareness and critical formation of students, which proposes modes of experimentation, creation, and discussion on arts and cultures for our students in order to coordinate extension, teaching, and research. In a cultural passport, students participated are invited to avail of cultural productions offered in a circuit of activities carried out by partners, cultural spaces, and institutions in the city, recognizing the formative process in the direct interaction with art. The project, A Cultural Policy for Young People in the Cultural Zone of Station Square, involves several institutions and collectives. These groups are made up of young people who live in the peripheral areas and are active in programs and movements that take place in the central region. They are invited to teach, to film, to share their poetry, dance, and visual production with students and researchers. In our knowledge space, a transversal museum for culture, science, and arts, it's sponsored by a medical cooperative. The notion of care became a common link in relation between the museum, the sponsor, and the province and city departments of the city. The most recent exhibition, University City, integrated virtually 17 of the city's cultural centers spread across the city and 25 university cultural and extension projects. Scholarships for students' creation is especially aimed to students who faced social isolation in situations of greater vulnerability and invited them to deal with the experience in different artistic languages and writing. They are in a virtual exhibition and deal with care, collectivity, resistance, reinvention. University has just approved the degree of notorious knowledge for artists and traditional masters, a degree that qualifies them to teach at the university. In northeast of the province, we work with many handicrafty masters for social and economic regional development. Intercultural education for indigenous teachers has been a regular course since 2009 and aims to prepare indigenous educators to work in their communities. Since its beginning, the course was built jointly by academics and indigenous leaders. And finally, at the Indigenous Words exhibition, part of this knowledge is shared through central conceptions of their cultures. As 5 groups of curators, they choose in 19 the knowledge they want to share with us in this time. They teach, for example, the uniqueness and respect for the difference between people. They say that the land is in the body and the body is in the land territory. And they talk about the transformations that govern the flow of time, the changes in everything. The master's teachings All these people are in risk of survival just right now. We finish this presentation with these dear words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. It's a very interesting project from the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, and I thank you so much for bringing this. And I think for someone who is so connected to the community, this vision of a grounded university with such an ecological perspective, the transition towards the work of Frank Finlay, who is from the University of Leeds and has been working in the field of cultural and modern languages with a particular emphasis on relationships with the community also. And he is also the director of the Institute of Arts, together with his role as the deputy director of culture and arts, culture and heritage. That's like this, sorry, Frank, for misguiding this, the name of your job. So sorry for that. But I think that surely the connections are important. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll just share my screen with you, hopefully. So good afternoon, everyone, and many, many thanks for the very kind invitation. It's an honor and a privilege to be here this afternoon, not least because sadly this is the first international event I've participated in 25 years without being a citizen of the European Union, sadly. I'm going to start by just giving you very brief background to the activities of my university as it engages with the arts and culture sector. And there's going to be an emphasis on some of the creative partnerships that we've established and the reasons why we have done that. And then in the second part of my short presentation, in line with the topic of the panel, I'm going to focus in on some of the experiences we've had in relation to participatory and non-participatory arts and cultural events, specifically their benefits for physical and mental health and well-being, in keeping with, as I say, with the nature of this particular panel. Just a practical note, within my presentation, for those of you watching on YouTube, there are some embedded links, hyperlinks, which you may wish to copy, and these will be links to things that kind of contextualize some of the things I'll be speaking about. So if I move on, the key thing I'd like to emphasize is that the university takes a kind of a partnership approach to engaging with arts and cultural organizations. There is a background to this, a kind of a strategic context. There's been in recent years a growing awareness of the importance of arts and culture, not just per se, but for broader socio-economic and health outcomes. And as a consequence of this, there's been some major shifts in the policy landscape, both at governmental and regional and civic level. The university's always had its own rich tradition of arts and cultural assets, museums, galleries, theatres and the like. But we wanted to put things on a firmer footing with some of our cultural partners, and we engaged in a wide-scale consultation with them. We asked them, how do you engage with a big university? University of Leeds is one of the 24 Russell Group universities, research-intensive universities in the UK. And we've got something like 40,000 students, which by British standards is a very large university. And they told us they needed to have a single point of entry. And that's what the Cultural Institute is. It's a point of entry for the creative cultural sector to engage with our students, to engage with our academics. And by the same token, it's an opportunity for our academics and students to go out and work with those cultural partners. The three main purposes then are to promote and boost interdisciplinary research. We do this by bringing cultural partners into early contact with our researchers, and we have a notion of co-creating research questions, all the better then for them to have an impact on addressing various societal problems that might exist. We'll see a couple of examples of those in a moment or two. In terms of our students, the idea there is to provide curricular and co-curricular activities that enhance both the quality of their learning and also enhance their broader student experience, their engagement with the city, their sense of belonging. Students tell us that having a sense of place and relating to place and relating to the arts and culture offering is very, very important to them. And so we've created innovative new modules together with cultural partners, one of which is called Engaging the Modern City, where the cultural partner, large or small, will approach us with an issue that they wish to address, and we will then match them to groups of particular students. And then finally, the third aim, in addition to research and student education, is in enhancing the participation and the wider engagement of the community which we serve in the city and region of Leeds and of Yorkshire. So if I can just turn to my next slide, which appears to, there we go. So I'm focusing now with some examples that relate specifically to this particular panel, namely to health and well-being. On the left, on my left, there's an example of work we've done, a research project where relations have been brokered with our Centre for Immersive Technologies on the one hand, and with arts and cultural fellows, so creative artists on the other. It relates to a project called Born in Bradford. Bradford is the neighbouring city of Leeds, and this is the largest cohort study of a group of kids. There's 30,000 young children who are being followed from an early age in terms of their social, economic, and health outcomes. And what you have in the in the photograph there is where the artists have taken data sets relating to these 13,000 children, and they've sought to visualize them. Each of the dots on the screen relates to a particular child, and various experiences they've had have been clustered according to a color code. So for example, proximity to green spaces and parks would be coded green within there. And I think you'll agree it's also rather a beautiful piece of art that's been created. So that's one example of a research project. Another would be the one on the other side of the screen, which is pairing a dance company, Yorkshire Dance Company, to reveal the benefits of dance for young people. And what was interesting here was not so much the physical benefits that you might expect in terms of movement and balance. We did a similar project with elderly people where there were real outcomes in terms of their balance and their susceptibility to falling and injuring themselves. But with young people, there was a big benefit that was brought to them in terms of things like resilience, self-confidence, self-awareness, and their ability to engage with broader society. And often young people from quite poor and socially deprived backgrounds. Moving on then just to my final slide. This is to narrate some activities that we've created in partnership, that we've actually helped to initiate with the broader community to explore the impact of culture and the arts on health. We started this in response to a particular government initiative, which was mentioned, if I just go back, I should do, on the previous slide. Just here, I've listed here, this was a parliamentary inquiry in 2017. There's also been a World Health Organization report about the benefits of arts and culture for health. And it was against this policy background and within this framework that we looked to create a dialogue with the clinical sector and with the arts and culture sector. We've had 3 conferences. The first one led to the creation of the Leeds Arts, Health and Wellbeing Network. And you'll see that there are some of the key players within that. And we have a research partnership with them. The following year, taking us to the middle of the slide, a big focus on young people and mental health and the benefits that there are, both in terms of well-being and how people feel, but as a kind of an intervention where various social determinants of mental health issues can be addressed through arts and health. And you'll see there's a link here. We have our own YouTube channel. There are a series of videos that document what went on at that particular conference. We brought young people. The most fascinating part was to have a panel of young people talking about mental health issues and how arts and culture had helped them. We involved artists in this, and that took us then to our final event, which took place because of COVID as a purely digital event. And this was looking at research and evaluation and trying to get to the bottom of what the beneficial outcomes can be in terms of prevention and also then of treatment. The colleague in the photograph there is University College London. She is the author of that World Health Organization report, which was a scoping piece of work on all the research that has been done into mental health and other outcomes. So just very briefly, that's an example of how the university engages with the arts and culture sector for multiple benefits. I haven't talked about some of the relationships we have with events that take place in the city. There is to be a City of Culture, a Festival of Culture next year, 2 years' time rather, which began life as a bid for European Union Capital of Culture for Leeds, but sadly that was a casualty of Brexit. But we're still going to continue with that, and the university support, both financial and in terms of the influence it has within the city, is key within that. And I'm now at 10 minutes, dead on. I will stop. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Frank. Very interesting contribution that shows also the relevance and the transversality of this approach that involves students, the ideas of co-creation, of research, and of course, a very connected link to the cultural organizations of the community. Now I'm going to ask Ryan Pillay, Deputy Director of Arts, Culture and Heritage from the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, to take the floor and please tell us a little bit. And I ask Frank, if you don't mind, of stop sharing the screens so that Ryan can move on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll just wait for
Frank, that you don't mind stop? Yes, it's just stop sharing. Yes. So maybe Ryan, if you have something to share, you can start because you will interrupt.
Yes, certainly.
Sharing, yeah. So you will override. Those one will override
certainly.
Presentations. Thank you.
All right. Are you able to see my screen? All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Isabel, and to the organizing committee for extending the invitation to South Africa. I am from Nelson Mandela University, and a few weeks ago, the name of our city, which was formerly Port Elizabeth, has been changed to Gqeberha. So there's a click in that. So there's also some cultural relevance around that particular name and what it means for us in this locale and this part of the city, particularly also rooted in its indigenous meaning and how our indigenous peoples play a role, particularly in the city and with its naming. I think the name of a university with a global statesman such as Nelson Mandela means that we have a particular responsibility in order for us to do what is right, to do what is just, and also to do what is fair. I'm just trying to change my screen. Yeah, move to the next slide, to do what is just, to do what is fair, and also for us to be values driven that are based in the ethos of our namesake, Nelson Mandela. This afternoon, for the few minutes that I have, I'm going to be talking about our university as a case study, particularly what experiences in arts, culture, and heritage we have started to implement, both for social inclusion, for community wellness, and for various stakeholder group wellness. Our staff, we've got about 3,500 staff members, our students. We are what we refer to in South Africa as a medium-sized university, and we have about 28,000 registered students. And then also the rest of our communities, not only in our metro, but in our province as well, as there are 4 local universities in this province. Some of the particular projects, the first one that I think we want to share is a project called Naming and Renaming. The university was made up of 4 previous institutions that got the name of Nelson Mandela University in 2017. As part of its wellness, its social cohesion, and really its transformation project, as you know, the history that South Africa has, and it essentially is a shared history that many parts of the world also has around change, is its naming conventions. So you'll see on the screen, for our naming and renaming as part of its cultural practices, we have phases for changing names of buildings to reflect both the different gender dynamic, to also include the different types of intelligences, to include our indigenous knowledges and its practices, and all the people that have come before that we wish to celebrate through naming particular infrastructure and particular buildings. Phases 3 and phases 4 would then also go on to moving to changing the names of the 7 campuses that the university has, both in the Eastern and in the Western Cape region. This particular project also looks to garner feedback from our different communities. The university does not operate in a vacuum, but is embedded within a community in the metro. So we felt it very important for us to engage with the different stakeholders. The second project that I want to talk about is called Signs and Symbols. When we think of the university and we think of Nelson Mandela University, we could very much also think of his ethos around social justice. And one particular value that we have is called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu stands, particularly loosely translated, I am because you are. And it is with that particular value that we use a project called Signs and Symbols to indicate to all our publics through creative signs, through imagery, through graffiti, what does the university stand for? What does it symbolize? What are our own ways of explaining to various people that both come onto our campus, but also look at us digitally? What do we stand for, and particularly what do we not stand for? So those in terms of one particular phase in Signs and Symbols. A second phase is how do we locate Africa and its continental iconography? How do we embed that in the visuals, in the graphics, and in the symbols that we want to showcase as Nelson Mandela University? And then the fourth phase, we look at Mandela's iconography, possibly also linked to Nelson Mandela's foundation itself. Some of the other examples that we also wish to share, arts, culture, and heritage as a department is embedded within a larger functional area within communication and marketing. So its role is both to be transformative, to be socially inclusive, but also to effectively communicate messages, not only to our staff and our students, but to our critical stakeholders as well. Now with COVID, we were unable to engage. As you know, the rollout of the vaccine in South Africa is particularly slow at this stage. So we've got to find other ways to get the story out there. Everybody has a story to tell. You'll see on the slide, we have something called Irona Times, a play on words from Corona. Irona Times essentially is a cartoon strip, a graphic offering, which comes out weekly with 6 frames that tells a particular message. And it's through the use of this type of visual medium that we are able to get that out across publics. We also make use of 3 of the predominant Eastern Cape languages. So it's able to go out into different parts and to different communities in spreading the message of what to do at a time of despair when people need more hope. What we've also embarked on at the advent of COVID in South Africa about a year ago to date, we have been working from home. So it then meant that we needed to tell our stories in different ways. And we've started to do that digitally more and more. We refer to them as short films called digital packages, and we have a series of them. To date, we have 37 such digital packages that we have then sent out across different parts of the world, naturally, for people to see what our students have been engaged on in various genres of poetry, dance, drama, and other forms of the arts as well. Another particular example that coincides with International Mother Tongue Day, multilingualism, is its celebration earlier this year in February. Given our key focus in spreading the message through the arts and through different communities, we've collaborated with another university, the University of Dar es Salaam, and we have written a series of children's books on the virus entitled Virus Fighters. And it, in fact, is translated into English, Afrikaans, isiXhosa, Kiswahili, and French for wider distribution amongst the African continent. So this a take in terms of social cohesion, but also in wellness and getting critical messages out there. Now, what would the arts be without some form of entertainment? And we had to then think, how do we continue with some of our programming, but still make it safe and still make it accessible to the widest possible audience? isiXhosa is a Xhosa word which refers to ceremony, and isiXhosa Jazz Fest 20 was in fact a jazz festival that we hosted online last year in November, where we were able to broadcast that globally, and we were very fortunate to receive wide coverage. This particular festival is a combination traditionally between community musicians, not necessarily musicians that have been trained through the academy, and then also student artists, and then also particular leading academics, where they work in collaborative ways in order to get this particular concert out and for enjoyment and for pleasure. We were fortunate with this particular concert, and I must say, COVID is so real. I was in hospital when this particular concert was broadcast, that we had well over 36,000 views for this particular free concert. Another particular area around music, the choir that the university then has also had to find ways to share their performances, and we were able to do that digitally. And one particular example here is by John Knox Bokwe, Plea from Africa. And we were able to record this individually with each of the choir members and then bring it together digitally for our communities and use then to supplement particular messaging of hope at a time of despair in South Africa. Isabel, I think I'm close to exceeding my time, if not at all. So I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and all these links will be made available for anybody to then enjoy them as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. Sorry to hustle you a little bit in the end. Such a lovely collection of very different and very relevant ways of connecting to the community and giving back. The idea of giving back to the community is also very important here in your presentation. And so I now have the pleasure to present our own prorector, José Castro Lopes. Please The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you very much for the organizer, for the invitation, especially to my colleague, Professor Fatima Vieira. I have a completely different perspective because I'm not from the arts and culture field, and so I was asked to give a brief perspective of what is a healthy university and the concept of healthy universities. So I will share my screen now. I guess you are now seeing my screen. And what I will wanted to share with you today is by this concept of health universities, which really started, everything started in the first conference that the WHO promoted for health promotion back in 1986 in Ottawa, Canada, where this very important concept emerged that health is not in the hospitals, in the health departments. Health is created and lived by people within the settings of their everyday life. So where they learn, they work, they play, and they love. And this was later on coined as the healthy settings approach. As a setting for health is any place where people engage in their daily activities and in which environmental, organizational, and personal facts interact to affect the health and well-being of everybody. This led to several initiatives that I'm sure we all heard, like the healthy cities, the healthy schools, healthy hospitals, healthy workplaces, healthy homes, and of course also healthy universities. And any setting that is a place where people live, where people work, where people are, is a healthy setting, or can be a healthy setting. And it is within these settings that by combining policies, environment, and complementary education programs, we can promote health. What is the role of universities in this health promotion? Well, first of all, universities are large institutions and they can bring health into their organizational culture. They can create supportive working and learning environments, and they can do it by appropriate management, communication, and policies. Also, they can affect the staff and students' well-being. They are creative centers for learning and research, and through this, they can have the potential to develop, synthesize, and apply health-related knowledge and understanding. Universities are also the place where future generations of decision makers are educators, and so they have the potential to develop a critical understanding of sustainable health and a sense of personal and community stewardship, which will affect society at large in the future. Universities are also the places where many students become independent, and so they have the responsibility and the potential to enable healthy personal and social development of the students. And finally, universities can also mediate changes for health and sustainable public policy, both at national, local, and global terms. So what is a health promoting university? It is an institution that provides a supportive environment for health, integrates health in their educational projects, and I would say also in their research projects, and protects health and promotes the well-being of all the community members, not only their own members, but also the local and regional population. Doris has proposed that a health university aspires to create a learning environment and organizational culture that enhances the health, well-being, and sustainability of its community and enables people to achieve their full potential. The objectives of healthy university are, of course, to promote healthy and sustainable policies and planning through the university, have a healthy working environment, both for staff and for students, support healthy personal and social development of the persons involved, to establish and improve primary health care, not only in the university, but in the local and regional terms, and to ensure a healthy and sustainable physical environment within the university, to encourage wider academic interest and developments in health promotion, and to develop links with the community. This can be done within this conceptual model in which by first assuming underpinning principles such as partnership, sustainability, equality and diversity, informed innovative practices, and within this input of higher education and public health drivers, there is a whole university approach that has three main focus areas. The first one is to create healthy and sustainable working, learning, and living environments for students, staff, and visitors. The second one is to increase the profile of health and sustainable development in learning, research, and knowledge exchange. And the third one is to contribute to the health and well-being and sustainability of the wider community. If we have this whole university approach, we will reach some deliverables. And the main deliverables are these that are listed in this slide: more supportive working and learning contexts, higher quality health and welfare services, healthy and sustainable food procurement processes and catering services, more access to sports, leisure, and social and cultural facilities, and support for an holistic approach to personal, social, and citizenship development, increased commitment to personal responsibility for health and sustainable development among students and staff, and finally, strengthening the institution-level commitment to practice corporate responsibility and to lead for health and sustainability in local, regional, national, and global partnerships. The main intervention areas that have been addressed in health promoting universities are the promotion of mental health. We just heard of how important is this issue for students and staff. The prevention of alcohol and drug abuse, promotion of healthy eating, promotion of physical activity, promotion of sexual health and sexually transmitted disease and AIDS prevention, the promotion of smoking-free spaces and smoking cessation, and finally, prevention of chronic disease. Of course, there are other intervention areas that can be addressed within this concept of health promoting universities, but these are the ones that are more common, and these are the ones that, for instance, in the University of Porto, we are addressing through our multidisciplinary integrated plan for health and well-being promotion. What are the potential benefits of health universities? First of all, improve the health and well-being of staff and students, of course. Then we can have a more motivated and supported workforce. We can reduce costs associated with sickness, absence, and not only sickness, absence, but also other social costs. We can achieve improved student experience and improved retention of students. We will put health and well-being formally on the university's agenda, which is also very important. And there will be opportunities for participation and developing health partnerships. I will finish by showing this virtuous circle of learning and health, which of course we all know that the healthier we are, the more likely we are able to learn, and the more educated we are, the more likely we are to be healthy. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting proposal because it also shows the transversality of health-related concern and health-related practices inside a university that engage not only specific interventions, but also a concern with a whole university approach that I think connects very well with what has been said by other people. So I now have the big pleasure of presenting or passing the word to Rosemary Dim, who is a very well-known and very dear, almost a Portuguese researcher in education, who has been doing extensive work on the role of universities, and with a very critical and very insightful perspective. So Rosemary, please.
Thank you. Boa tarde. So I come from quite a small university in the UK called Royal Holloway, which has about 10,000 students. And it was built in the Victorian times. So it has a main building, which is a copy of a French chateau. So I didn't bring the photos because I didn't know how well they would reproduce, but you get the kind of general impression. And what I want to talk about is kind of connected to lots of things that people have already talked about in this session, but I want to particularly to talk about doctoral researchers, because they are a group that often gets forgotten in universities. And they are also the group that it appears from a lot of the research that's been coming out in the last 4 or 5 years, they are the group most likely of any other students to experience poor well-being and poor mental health. And I think there are all sorts of reasons why that might be the case, but I think one of the things is that they're a relatively invisible group. Now you might think, well, of course they're visible to the people who supervise them. Well, obviously they are. But if you look at the average university, and there isn't really an average university, but unless it's very tiny, you're going to have lots and lots of undergraduates, quite a lot of master's students. Doctoral students just disappear in that context. And so they're kind of taken for granted. And I think a bit like postdocs, that doctoral students are also seen as kind of people who can do bits of work that more established academics don't want to do, which of course is very useful, but it may of course affect their mental health. And they may have not very good work-life balance due to a kind of long hours culture in the academic world anyway. And also the fact that so many of the jobs that they might get are going to be very precarious. And so some people take a very individual approach to this and to say, oh, well, the problem with doctoral researchers is that they lack resilience. I once tried to find out about resilience trainers for our institution, and I discovered that someone charged a huge amount of money to basically come and tell people that it was their fault that they were not experiencing good mental health, which I kind of thought wasn't really quite the idea. And I mean, these, you know, doctoral researchers are the academics, the scientific leaders and the experts of the future. So we need to look after them. So what kinds of problems have they experienced, particularly pre-COVID? I'll come to the COVID situation in a minute. For years, I've been the person in my institution who oversaw all the extensions and interruptions of study that doctoral researchers asked for. And that, you know, sometimes it's for a good reason, like parental leave, but, you know, sometimes it's horrible, like, you know, bereavement or something. But also, what struck me is that a large number of these cases were about mental health, that people talked about anxiety, they talked about depression, they talked about feeling like an imposter, that they couldn't really do what they were doing. How could they possibly ever be an academic expert on anything? They didn't have any real self-belief. They thought that what they were doing was of low value. They found it often quite hard to cope with criticism. So if you got your chapter criticised, it wasn't just your chapter wasn't very good, it also meant that you didn't think you were very good. And the kind of context in which they are studying is quite a high pressure one, where failure is seen as evidence that you can't actually do the job, or you can't do the things you want to do. And I think that that's quite problematic for a lot of those students. And I think in a sense, I belong to a Facebook page called, you know, Reviewer 2 Must Be Stopped. And this is a kind of, some of you may have come across it. I mean, it's supposed to be about publishing, as you can guess, but all sorts of things get fed into the mix. So there are things about, you know, how awful it is doing a PhD and how they'll be glad when they finished and how worthless it is. So some of that strays into that kind of territory as well. And I think that is part of the issue, is that the individuals are blamed. And it's almost like just mentioning a PhD makes people start to think about not having well-being, not having good mental health. Then, of course, along comes COVID. So then you get a whole set of new problems. So universities and laboratories have been partially or fully closed in most countries. People haven't been able to complete experiments. Their field work has been disrupted. We had someone who wanted to study the Japanese Olympics. Now, the Japanese Olympics is going ahead, but as there are no spectators, then I think the kind of research that that particular individual is going to be able to do is like a million miles from what they imagined they were going to be doing when they enrolled. You get lots of access to non-digitized archives and books. Lots of conferences have been cancelled, all right, online events have replaced them. But in terms of people who are new to an academic field or new at that level, actually the networking that you can do for an online conference is very different to the kind of networking that you do if it's a face-to-face event. A lot of them live in cramped living conditions, share a house with lots of other people. They may not have very good Wi-Fi connectivity. They might not have suitable devices. Their theses may well have missing data. Their submission and their defense is going to probably be delayed. And when the defense comes, it will be online, which is fine, but it's different to the face-to-face experience. And what lots of people are worried about is there's a stigma that's going to be attached to COVID PhDs. So what can we actually do about this? Because clearly this is not a good situation. So what will the post-COVID campus look like if you're a doctoral student? Will it feel hollowed out? What cultural activities await them? Is there a need, I think, for a definition of arts and culture which are inclusive though? Because obviously, I mean, I know we had some questions for this session and some of them are about, you know, do participatory experiences have more effect than non-participatory experiences? Are some arts more likely to have beneficial effects than others? I think those are important questions, but it seemed to me that what we need to think about is variety, because if we don't have inclusive definitions of arts and culture, and if we don't understand that interculturality is a really important aspect of anything that we do, then the problem is that you will put off some people who think that being involved in the arts means being forced to listen to the opera or to walk around old buildings. And this is not necessarily what everybody wants to do. So actually making sure there's a choice for PhD engagement in these things is important. And if we ever can go back to face-to-face events, which I hope, so is food. I'm sure I've never ever been to any event in Portugal that didn't have food attached to it somewhere. And I think someone's already mentioned the importance of co-creation, and I think that is important. But it's also opening up things that are underused or hidden. So this isn't a doctoral researcher's example per se, but it kind of makes the same point. Is that we have it in our institution, we have this Victorian collection of paintings, which is in a picture gallery. And when I first went there in 2009, if you even walked anywhere near this room, a security guard suddenly appeared from nowhere and said, "You're not going in there, are you?" And it was basically used for weddings, exams, and graduation. So many students only ever went in there on their graduation day, or they sat their exams in there. But there's an interesting painting there. It's a painting by Landseer, and it basically shows two polar bears devouring a ship. Now, this could have been quite useful a few days ago in the Suez Canal, although I think not many polar bears around there. But this picture has got the reputation of making people fail their exams. So it always has to be covered up during any examinations. But what has happened for the picture collection as a whole is that when a new curator came along and she said, "I want to open this up to people," so now students can go and see it regularly, people from outside can see it. If you have visitors, they're able to go there. And it's totally transformed the way people see it. Now, Victorian paintings are not everybody's kind of choice of art. I mean, when I first went there, I didn't think they would be very interesting. Actually, they are extremely interesting, but not everybody will want to do it. But now it's part of the institution, whereas in the past it was kind of hidden away. So how do we find out what doctoral researchers might want, what kind of activities they might be interested in? Well, we could run an online survey, we could arrange focus groups, you could use something like Padlet, which is a kind of electronic bulletin board software, which allows you to ask a small number of questions and then get anonymized responses. You could ask the units that they work in to talk to them, and I think that would be quite useful. But how can the arts and cultural activities actually help doctoral researchers' well-being? Well, one of the things I think is that it might be a way of restoring their self-worth. I've written already about the importance of not just blaming the individuals who suffer the poor mental health, and actually thinking about the environment and getting them to do things which might be things like lifelong learning, and don't mean necessarily for them, but them helping other people with that, so that they actually end up doing something much more interesting. But arts and cultural activities can help restore work-life balance And I don't think it matters whether the activities are participatory or not. And in any case, there are lots of things like immersive visualization and immersive theatre, which are actually hybrids. They're participative for everybody, perhaps in different ways, but nevertheless, that's there. It can help them form new networks that they might be struggling to find at the moment, particularly because a lot of the events that they normally go to in terms of their work are not available. It gives them the chance to learn new knowledge and acquire new skills. It offers enjoyment, relaxation, and a change of pace. And because the arts can be accessed both face-to-face and virtually, any kind of program is actually going to be suitable for the situation that we find ourselves now in with COVID and whatever comes later. And I think also, and people have already talked about community involvement, and we've had some very good contributions in this session about that, that PhD researchers could be involved in volunteering to take arts outreach to the community. And so I'm just finished with some kind of ideas about how we could raise awareness of the arts and culture amongst doctoral researchers. And I don't think very many institutions are doing this, because I think, as I say, that doctoral students tend to get forgotten when it comes to this, because they're not a mass group and they're not particularly visible. You could set up a kind of doctoral arts and cultural virtual network. That would work quite well for doctoral schools, which are very common now. You could have a doctoral arts society. You could have a community arts project, which involves doctoral researchers and people from the local community. You could create positive stories and narratives about good doctoral education experiences and successes. We've already tried to do that at Royal Holloway, and that's starting to work quite well, because if you get people to tell their own stories, whatever that's about, whether it's about a particular experience, the emphasis is on a positive experience, because so much of what happens to doctoral students is they get told misery stories all the time. And then as soon as you mention anything to do with, for example, their viva defense or their thesis, some people already have switched off. So we need to move away from that and think about the power of things like storytelling and kind of narratives about good doctoral education experiences, which includes the arts and culture. You could develop a phone app that notifies of upcoming activities, events in the area. Doctoral researchers could have a regular arts blog. You could organise an event with doctoral alumni who work in the field of arts and culture. We actually tried this out a few weeks ago, and that was extremely successful. We had people who were writers, we had people who worked with TV producers, someone who worked in the National Archive in the UK, somebody who worked with a museum. And quite a lot of people came who were not from the arts and humanities, and they were amazed that these people could actually get jobs. But they were so engaging that not only did they have jobs, but they told you how they went about it and were able to offer hints to the people there. You could run an induction week arts event for new doctoral researchers, because often the induction that doctoral researchers get at the beginning of an academic year is not as good or as extensive as it is for undergraduates or for master's students. And you could develop an interactive cultural map of the university and the city or the town that it's in for wider distribution. So those are just a few ideas. Thank you very much for inviting me. Obrigada por me convidar para falar.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you so much. And I think this ideas connect very well with the discourse of our final invitee for today, which is Vera Dickman. She's the coordinator of intercultural issues on the Université Paris-Saclay, and I give you the floor, Vera.
Thank you very much, Professor Isabel. I think I wanted to start with, and with a little joke with Ryan there, the beginning of how I feel. It's always impossible until it's done. And then how I'll end when you tell me to stop here, because I think there is a lot to say, and it's very difficult to say something new at the same time at the end of such a rich 2 days of extraordinary panel exchange. So congratulations to the organizers, and thank you very much. I feel honored to have been invited to speak here by the Vice Rector of Culture of the University of Porto, Fatima Vieira. And this is the result of the combination of our universities as a European University Alliance of Global Health, UGLO, in which Université Paris-Saclay, Porto, University of Szeged, Lund, and Ludwig Maximilian are all partners. So within the context of this partnership, I'm able to also present Université Paris-Saclay, the top-notch science university, who agreed with UGLO to create a new project in the context of non-formal cultural interchange for global health, and to support new ways to explore the current health crisis and transform it into a positive, collaborative learning experience for students and staff across our network. So our project, which we call E-Spaces of Collaborative Encounter, or E-Spaces of Creative Encounter, addresses aspects of learning that had not really been seen or given importance to till now, addressed, because pleasureization is always the priority. But today's world, faced with uncertainty, we need to maintain well-being and, as Rosemary mentioned, resilience, while deprived of our usual means of communication or income. And we have to be as fully present in 2D as in 3D, and to still know how to build trust and to communicate. But we can now take the opportunity actually to reach beyond borders and disciplines and explore this new space creatively, and all the more so because we have an EU network in which to do so. So one of the questions to address was, is to what extent do we believe that the creative process is central to health and well-being, and are there proven therapeutic effects? Well, we have to say that this journey was made possible by the pandemic because of the new questions we have to address together. And contrary to what many may believe, creative techniques are not only for artists, as we've heard. Everyone can benefit for them. And artists themselves speak of the benefits. For example, William Kentridge, the much acclaimed visual and very eclectic artist today, says that in artistic practice, you cannot fail, but you cannot manufacture failure. If you do, you succeed. So you have to adopt an attitude of openness to things that go wrong. Take the other idea, work with free association, make new meaning, see what's there. Okay. For Henri Michaud, the artist here above me, Franco-Belgian 20th century contemporary art, dual artist and thinker, art is what goes against inertia. What counts is tonus and energy, directing oneself towards a state of maximum elan, of density, of being fully actualized. It's not about skills, because, he says with glee, my lack of skills continues to provide me with surprises, young in knowledge, young at heart. For William Kentridge, the challenge is to undo the authority of certainty and to replace it with a utopian way of thinking and seeing how the world can operate. How can trust be built between people of different origins and backgrounds? How can people who do not know each other build something new together and find meaning and pleasure in doing so? How can the victim and the perceived oppressor enter into dialogue? How can we allow ourselves to enter a co-creative, interactive, and magical space open to continuous possibility as we develop further sensitivity towards each other? Where can we listen to each other's stories and begin to heal wounds? Yesterday, the speakers and artists eloquently addressed this. What is commonly owned? How can our experience, even simply that of being European citizens, be shared? What territory do we share? And it's not only about memory and history. It's about facing the same challenges of building a democratic future together for all citizens as whole beings. And we've heard very much about this. Art is also innovative. Henri Michaud says the artist is of the future, which is why he drives things forward. In freeing up his own situation, he frees up 100 more, those of an entire era, or of an era yet to be hatched. So it was Sandrine Lacombe, the UGLO president, who challenged the partners of UGLO in April 2020 to join forces and meet at the EU versus the virus hackathon to fight the virus. So as the coordinator in charge of internationalization of the curriculum and interculturality at the University Paris-Saclay, I felt my role particularly challenged as mobility would be affected, as would integration of international students and communication between them. As a research associate member of the SLAM lab, so SLAM at Paris-Saclay stands for synergies between languages, arts, and music, I felt drawn to working on a creative and intercultural solution. This is how I met 6 artists from the Parliament of Practices of Nordisk Teater Laboratorium from Denmark, all living in 6 different countries. But the idea was that they were experimenting with using digital space in an embodied way, so as to be able to continue to perform and to be as fully present in 2D as in 3D, at the same time taking the opportunity to extend their reach across borders. So I'll be showing you how we started together, which was after the hackathon, to experiment together every single week for 3 hours on Saturday morning, and creating with and for each other as total unknowns, regular artistic learning and co-creation opportunities. And surprisingly, after 5 months of lockdown and uninterrupted workshops, we managed to meet up in Germany for a proximal workshop, and the magic was still there. And that is how we decided to try to take the project to campus, to our universities, in order to fight student isolation in the new academic year, to create virtual exchange or mobility experience within our alliance in a non-formal context, and to help students build resilience. So I'll just share what we put up on the website as a, and of course it was there and now has disappeared again, which is frustrating, which was what we had put up on the website as a, oh, how absolutely annoying, because it was there a moment ago. So the actual invitation to participate in the workshops, but I'll just go ahead anyway. So annoying that it's not there. Oh, anyway. So let me just continue. I will just continue because I will tell you what, you can always go to the workshop page with uglo.eu. What a shame, because I had it there. Oh, what a shame. Never mind. So basically we gave ourselves 5 main objectives for our students and the staff: to increase resilience when faced with uncertainty, increased agency and creativity in digital space, enhanced experience of embodied multimodal communication, enhanced personal reflective and creative skills, enhanced cultural awareness or intercultural agility, to use Michael Murphy's term earlier in the summit. So we agreed on a framework of 4 consecutive weeks with a commitment to 3 hours a week per workshop on a Saturday morning for a maximum of 20 participants per session, and 2 performance artists from different fields, theatre, dance, voice, and the visual arts, running every session. And this would give students and staff a unique chance both to interact with artists and with each other in a virtual and intercultural exchange, where they would experience being collaborators and co-producers of culture, not consumers, as Paulo Perez do Valle mentioned yesterday. So when we launched this eSpaces of Creative Collaboration workshop, and within a week had 19 registrations from 4 universities and a variety of nationalities and fields: nutritional sciences, biomedical engineering, media informatics, educational sciences, law, management, psychology, music, fine arts, theatre, art therapy, and non-formal learning for international projects, including 2 or 3 doctoral students from the University Paris-Saclay, just to and we considered that trust building was an important part of the process, enabling those who were previously unknown to each other to connect across roles, cultures, disciplines, and emerge enriched from the experience. The activities focus on the flow, energy, and dynamics of the process rather than on creating an end product, which also taking the time to reflect and exchange on experiences. So they welcome and encourage individual contributions to the group connection. And before I'm forced to end, which I might be soon, I'm not sure, because I could take this quite a bit further, I would like to comment. We asked the students if they thought that creativity contributed to mental health in any way. And this is one of the answers I received. Creativity is extremely crucial to mental health. it is very important to be able to change perspectives and see the world through a different point of view. Sometimes it's also good to forget about everything that's usually going on in your life or in your head. I've been having psychological and psychiatric issues for a couple of years. Being able to meet new people at university and engage in activities such as e-spaces of creative encounter has been a life-changing experience, allowing me to slowly leave my rigid and harmful mindset. As for my future career as a biomedical engineer, creativity is very important to allow me to come up with new ideas. As I'm made to perceive humans as cells and machines, creative activities also remind me that people are this unique system that is much more clever than a robot or dancing atoms. We're much more complex than that. We're much more than I'll probably ever understand. And as I intend to work for human beings, I must keep that in mind. So the specificity nonetheless, and I don't have the time to go into all the other activities that the university provides from an extramural perspective for staff and students, and which have been very much adhered to, 400 students per semester that sign on to different workshops. I would say the specificity of eSpace as a collaboration was using our European network and the technological know-how that the students have today to cross borders of language and disciplines, to explore the unknown other, to reach across into interculturality, and to foster the curiosity, trust, and desire to get to know each other better. One student even wrote and said, I would like, the last request, I would like to get to know these amazing people more personally, their age, their field of study, their hobbies, or if they have a pet. So I think if the interactive digital dialogues that we saw between their objects in the last session, in this we could observe that trust had been built crossing physical borders, and that now crossing physical borders to meet each other is now simply a COVID, if not a financial challenge. And we conclude that these kinds of workshops, if fully funded, could easily be embedded into any degree offerings as a cross-curricular module or a transversal skills communication course, because it's absolutely essential too for teams working online, which is here to stay perhaps, to offer a way in which to become more fully present in online space, therefore more powerful, more creative, more effective in communication. Its communication also centers on non-articulated language. And if we offer a way to practice embodied presence, exploring the digital space to gain agency in it, if we feel relaxed and expressive in the digital world, then it in itself becomes a creative space where we can contribute and continue to work together while respecting the environment and the whole human being, self and other. Thank you very much, and I will indeed stop here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vera. Sorry for this last minute pressure, but we really have to finish on time. So I'm going to do what Fatima Vieira has asked me to do. So when I take the chance to thank her, and of course also Paulo for the very nice organization of this conference, to congratulate them in advance for a very successful event, and to try to do what I've been asked to do, was to sum up a little bit of your very rich contributions. This is an impossible task, but I will try my best to honor you by trying to say some things about what you've said. So arts, health, and well-being. This is a very well-known, established relationship. We know for years that there are important links between arts and health and well-being, both in terms of physical and mental health. But we also know that this can happen both in clinical and out of clinical contexts, and that this also has risks. And I will just name them the risks of a feeling good approach in this relationship between arts and health and well-being. The risks of a feeling good approach are, of course, not the risks that we want universities to assume. We are complex cultural entities, as Fernando has said. We are, of course, as complex as arts in itself are complex endeavors. And as such, we need for a more complex vision of this articulation and this perspective. And I think some of your contributions help us think about that. First, there's a very beautiful song by U2, which is based on a poem by Salman Rushdie, The Ground Beneath Her Feet. And this idea of a grounded university was very clear in both the perspectives of Leeds, Nelson Mandela University, but also the perspectives illuminated here, also by Vera in a way and by Fernando, are very much interesting because they emphasize the need for universities to be grounded in the communities where they work, where they are inserted. And of course, this means also that this gives both students and professors and staff the opportunity for what I think Frank called as a sense of place. This idea of a connection with the environment that is so important. And I think that the University Federal de Minas Gerais has demonstrated so well in the presentation of Fernando, the need for a strong connection with your local communities and the environment. But of course, you also pointed away. In particular, I think that Rosemary's José Castro Lopes and Vera also emphasized the need that internally the university has to do things, has to have a strategy to emphasize arts, well-being and health of students, of staff, of professors, of researchers. And this idea that we have to look inside out from the university and also within the university as a place of culture, of artistic fruition and of artistic production. It's also very important. I thank you for stressing this out. So these internal organizational implications are important, as well as the fact this connection with the surrounding community, this collaboration, these opportunities for co-creation have relevant implications for the quality of teaching and research within the university. And I think that this connection is very important, and you have demonstrated this very strongly. The fourth point that I would like to bring is probably the least consensual, but it's my reading of what you've said. And this is the need for a political perspective. It's clear from what you've said, there are issues of social justice, of oppression that should be dealt with. And we have to push forward a political perspective in both two senses that I've read here. First, the recognition of how the lack of power, experiences of oppression and injustice and disempowerment are essential in the development of mental health issues, in the development of problems of physical health, and also, of course, our menaces to well-being. And they must be approached if we don't want to go for a feel-good approach in this connection between arts and health. And this, of course, implies that we must take sides. And this, I would like to turn to the talks of both Fernando and Ryan, and how they talk about issues of environmental justice, the need for decolonial perspectives, the need for ecocentric perspectives that emphasize the relationship and the interaction between what you can call as the need for a connection between humans and non-humans, the need for a connection between forms of knowledge that are there and must be recognized, and the need to do this and use the arts as a way to do this. So I think it's well, as I said, it's my reading of your very interesting talks that doesn't make justice to what you've said, but I think it's time to finish now. So thank you so much. And as I promised, the port wine that we are not going to have later tonight. Thanks, Rosemary. And thanks all of you, and a toast to Fatima and to Paulo for their jobs. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
ao Museu de História Natural e da Ciência da Universidade do Porto, um museu universitário com décadas de história inteiramente ao serviço da comunidade. Aqui, em conjunto com todos os nossos públicos e parceiros, investigamos, preservamos e divulgamos coleções de História Natural e da Ciência, para dar a conhecer a história do mundo e também a da Universidade. Todos os dias estudamos as nossas coleções e fazemos-las crescer, nomeadamente no contexto das expedições realizadas pela nossa equipa e parceiros a todos os cantos do planeta. No museu descrevemos novas espécies para a ciência e dessa forma contribuímos para o conhecimento e a conservação da biodiversidade à escala mundial. Particularmente relevantes são as sólidas parcerias estabelecidas com diversos países africanos de língua oficial portuguesa, com os quais colaboramos diariamente na caracterização do mundo natural.
A cada dia, as nossas coleções são enriquecidas com novos espécimes. Alguns destes de referência, como é o caso dos vouchers depositados no Herbário PO. Estes constituem valiosos recursos que são usados como ponto de partida para a delineação de projetos de investigação realizados no contexto de redes nacionais e internacionais.
As portas do museu e as suas coleções estão de facto abertas a todos. Investigadores de universidades e centros de investigação de todo o mundo recorrem constantemente às nossas coleções. Em particular, as coleções de arqueologia são frequentemente solicitadas por peritos nacionais e estrangeiros. Amostras obtidas a partir de elementos biológicos destas coleções são utilizadas em análises moleculares no contexto de estudos de populações humanas que têm vindo a permitir reconstituir o nosso passado e a história evolutiva. O nosso museu alberga uma das maiores coleções de esqueletos humanos dos últimos caçadores-recoletores pré-históricos da Europa, que tem vindo a ser estudada por equipas multidisciplinares.
Para além da história da nossa espécie, as coleções do museu são também usadas para reconstruir a história do nosso planeta. Apenas com recurso ao registro fóssil, conseguimos conhecer o aspecto de animais, plantas e outros organismos já extintos. Um exemplo clássico são os dinossauros. Mas na coleção de paleontologia do museu encontramos outros fósseis igualmente fascinantes, como por exemplo estes, colhidos aqui bem perto em São Pedro da Cova e depositados no museu. Neles podemos observar a interação entre plantas e insetos. Estes testemunhos do passado ajudam-nos a reconstruir habitats que existiam há milhares e até milhões de anos.
E do passado, voltamos ao presente, destacando o contributo das coleções biológicas do museu para monitorizar a biodiversidade e saúde ambiental. Aqui recolhemos e conservamos amostras biológicas não invasivas de aves e seus parasitas, que são utilizadas em estudos toxicológicos, genéticos e isotópicos realizados à escalas nacional e internacional.
As coleções de insetos do museu são usadas de várias formas e estudadas com várias finalidades. Por exemplo, neste momento, um dos projetos em que estamos a colaborar é a lista vermelha dos invertebrados. E de que maneira é que isso se faz? As coleções são estudadas, os exemplares são identificados, os dados são registados e vão servir para a avaliação do estatuto de ameaça das espécies em Portugal continental.
Os parceiros e utilizadores do museu são, sem dúvida, múltiplos e diversificados. A nossa equipa colabora de forma constante com empresas de consultoria ambiental, autarquias e ONGs, prestando apoio técnico especializado e consultoria, nomeadamente no contexto da definição de planos municipais e de ordenamento do território e orlas costeiras, bem como em estudos de impacto e monitorização ambiental.
O museu é um espaço aberto à comunidade académica. Muitos são estudantes que, anualmente, aqui encontram as condições ideais para a realização dos seus estágios, sejam estes de âmbito curricular ou extracurricular. Muitos dos dados obtidos no contexto destes estágios, como por exemplo o registro de diferentes espécimes, são colocados à disposição da comunidade internacional através da sua incorporação em bases de dados de acesso livre.
Além de estudantes, temos também o privilégio de acolher no museu voluntários dinâmicos e dedicados, alguns detentores de um vasto conhecimento em áreas muito diversas, na esfera das ciências, artes e património, que connosco colaboram no estudo, promoção, divulgação e valorização das coleções.
Nesta lógica de abertura à comunidade, a ciência cidadã também é uma área que muito valorizamos. Para além da promoção dos nossos próprios projetos, participamos igualmente em projetos internacionais, como é o caso, por exemplo, do Silent Cities, para o qual estamos a contribuir com a disponibilização de registros sonoros para a monitorização de aves em zonas urbanas.
De igual forma, o património e o conhecimento do museu são também disponibilizados ao grande público, através de múltiplas atividades de divulgação e promoção da cultura científica. Muitas destas desenvolvidas em colaboração com outros museus, centros de ciência e centros de monitorização e interpretação ambiental, entre outras entidades culturais e científicas.
A promoção cultural mediada pelo museu decorre dentro e fora de portas. As nossas peças estão continuamente em circulação, quer fisicamente, quer através dos mais diversos suportes e canais digitais, figurando em exposições, catálogos, publicações e repositórios nacionais e internacionais.
Mas a aventura começa desde logo nos espaços do museu e nas suas exposições. Na Galeria da Biodiversidade, por exemplo, podemos observar diversas amostras de minerais que fazem as delícias dos visitantes. Aqui, podemos inclusivamente observar uma amostra de esmeralda em estado bruto, antes de ser transformada e lapidada. Portanto, antes de adquirir a forma típica de joia semi-preciosa que estamos habituados a reconhecer.
Neste momento em que nos preparamos para abrir um deslumbrante espaço expositivo no polo central do museu, que é o reabilitado Laboratório Químico Ferreira da Silva, estamos a preparar instrumentos, utensílios, produtos químicos, livros e mobiliário que nos irão permitir dar corpo à narrativa que preparamos. O convite fica desde já feito. Esperamos poder contar tão brevemente quanto possível com a vossa visita.
Jane Pickering is no stranger to the topics under discussion in the summit. She has been working in university museums for 30 years now, and over that time, she has focused on the unique opportunities available to university museums to serve communities both on and off campus. Well, she has coordinated numerous exhibition projects, and she has developed innovative programs in informal education. And she has led multiple initiatives to address the profound challenges of historic anthropologic collections while promoting historical reflection and nurturing respectful, open, and reciprocal relations with descendant communities and other heritage stakeholders. Even yesterday, there was this news about the new policy adopted by Harvard Museum and promoted by Jane Pickering for the repatriation of Native American human remains and funeral objects when it is possible to determine a tribal affiliation. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing about it today as well. Well, Jane, Your participation in the summit is a treat to us all. We believe that museums are public institutions of knowledge that need to be put at the very heart of the universities and communities. For the next 30 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fatima. That's very kind of you to say. It's a generous introduction. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Peabody Museum at Harvard and the collections it stewards are located in the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. And we strive to honor this relationship in ways that are authentic and collaborative. Since the museum, like so many others, is currently closed, I come to you this afternoon for you, this morning for me, from the Connecticut shoreline, the traditional lands of the Quinnipiac, or people of the Long Water Land. And I am delighted to join you virtually, although having seen some of the films earlier on and had the privilege of hearing a conference paper from Maria João Fonseca, which included photographs of the stunning galleries at the Museum of Natural History and Science, I cannot wait to be able to visit in person at some point in the future. I was thrilled and honored to be asked to address this conference and want to thank you, Fatima, and the other organizers for inviting me. Although I feel I've been given a slightly unenviable task, that of speaking after so many brilliant scholars, public figures, educators, artists, and scientists at the end of 2 days of fascinating conversation and inspirational thinking. And I cannot possibly hope to draw together so many ideas. So I thought in my presentation today, I would try to pick up 3 threads from the panels and focus on, first, the role of the museum at the heart of the university and how we can train students to be agents of change in their communities, to be global citizens, and to engage with the crucial challenges of our time. Secondly, the importance and potential of cross-disciplinary work and how we can build on the common creative endeavor that is science and art. And finally, the role of a university in regard to its local community. While the research and teaching mission of universities is clearly to serve all of society, how does this manifest itself in regard to our own neighborhoods? Now, of course, these 3 threads overlap significantly as they are all important and expansive topics. So I can only touch on each very briefly. 2 other things I should mention at the beginning, and as Fatima mentioned, I am a museum person, having worked in university museums for my entire career. And so you will find I use museums as examples, but I hope it will be clear that how those examples are relevant to other types of cultural entities that are housed within our universities. I also plan to use a lens of inclusion and equity throughout my presentation, and we've heard this in this meeting before. The last year has been, in the words of Lonnie Bunch, the Secretary of the Smithsonian, a year of twin pandemics, COVID and the acts of racism that have exposed the deep inequities in our societies. In addition, there is the growing recognition of the legacy of colonialism that is embedded within the entire history of our institutions. How colonialism drove what was collected, how collecting took place, the language used to document our collections, past exhibitions. See how I use the word our right there, the collections, not our collections, the collections we hold in trust, past exhibitions, and how collections were used in teaching. So the forced sort of full stop of many of our activities because of COVID has become, I think, a moment of possibility. It is a moment when our institutions can demonstrate our value to the community and to the academy by facing our histories and creating tools and programs that help address these inequities, to attempt restorative justice and repair, and to provide inspiration and hope. So let me start with the role of our cultural institutions in the academy. Not surprisingly, I believe that they can be a vibrant part of an academic community and foster creative interaction among wide-ranging constituencies. we can be fully embedded in our community of researchers, teachers, and students as they advance knowledge and seek solutions to the world's greatest challenges. We have a responsibility, to use the title of one of the panels, to be at the heart of the university, and particularly to further our educational role in preparing students to be engaged global citizens who will celebrate the immense diversity of human culture and will address the critical issues of our time. As we think intentionally about the educational benefits of a residential college experience, we provide unique value from direct encounters with objects and from physical presence within the museum. University museums pioneered object-based learning from their very earliest days, and recent years have seen a revival in their use as faculty have realized they can significantly deepen a student's learning experience. Museum collections provide opportunities that are collaborative, creative, multidimensional, and cross-disciplinary. They promote the development of research and critical thinking skills. The allure and impact of studying from the real thing provides a profound experience that cannot be equaled. Of course, we have all learned much in the last year about the potential of online education. But what's been exciting to me is imagining how in the future we compare what we've learned from the digital with our place-based experiences to create well-rounded opportunities for learning. Pedagogical opportunities go far beyond the traditional museum class visit. Many classes at our university take a step further, asking students to think about the art of making and bringing physicality into the classroom, such as fashioning new copies of giant reliefs from the ancient Assyrian palaces of Nimrud and Nineveh in ancient Near East, ancient lives, of course. Another course, American Fetish, Consumer Culture Encounters the Other, taught by Professor Caroline Light from Studies of Women, Gender and Sexuality, used Peabody Museum collections to provide her students with a way of accessing the material foundations of our contemporary fetish for difference. In a response to a new exhibit at the Peabody on the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, she asked students to create their own self-portraits in response to the portraits of people from around the globe that were exhibited in the anthropology halls during the fair. The students had to grapple with questions of agency and audience and to question the terms by which human difference has historically served both as popular entertainment and as education. The students' self-portraits were then put on display in an adjacent gallery to our permanent exhibit. I don't plan to go into this in detail today, but I would be remiss not to mention at this point that we are at the cusp of a digital awakening in education, and we need to think about the implications for learning of this shift from authentic objects to digital surrogates, whether they are on screen or 3D printed. In a class, Pyramid Schemes, the Archaeological History of Ancient Egypt, students had a 3D modeling and virtual curation assignment. Using collections from the Peabody Museum and the Museum of the Ancient Near East, the Box Center for Teaching and Learning produced 3D scans and models of Egyptian artifacts, and then offered a training session for students to provide them with the skills necessary to design a 3D museum exhibit. Programs like this that provide new opportunities to access and handle objects, particularly those that are rare, delicate, or not readily accessible, together with the expanded access via high-fidelity digital reproductions, also has the potential to reach broad, underserved audiences, helping to provide more equitable access to these resources. Another area where museums can expand students' academic experience is in providing a valuable opportunity for them to learn and practice communication skills, to engage people beyond the scholarly community and their peers. This is particularly important for graduate students who may be going on to academic careers. And each year at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, we run the Science Education Partners Program. in which science graduate students learn how to produce hands-on demonstrations and give short talks aimed at a family audience. The resulting event that we call I Heart Science is very popular, and we are in talks with the graduate school administration to expand this concept into the arts and humanities. In 2014, we launched a student tour guide program. 11 students from anthropology, sociology, history, and the Divinity School undertook an intensive 10-week training program to give highlight tours of the Peabody Museum to the public. Students can customize the basic tour to fit their own interests, thereby delivering a personal tour that is more meaningful to them, and our evaluation has shown to visitors. At Harvard, preparation for a special cross-faculty seminar called Teaching with Collections revealed that more than 100 faculty were using objects as centerpieces of courses in areas as diverse as visual studies, history of science, evolutionary biology, and expository writing. A survey of graduating students found that 89% had visited at least one campus museum during their 4 years at the university, that 3/4 of students reported using museum collections in their classes, and more than 1/3 felt the museums had enhanced their academic experience at Harvard. And what's interesting is that when we delved into the data, we found those numbers were very similar for students who were studying the arts and humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences. We found students from all disciplines were benefiting from the museums, and in the tradition of a liberal arts education, were also learning across the disciplines, from the Harvard Art Museum supporting a chemistry degree to glass flowers being used in a class on Japanese scrolls. And this brings me to my second topic, the importance of research and education that reflects multiple disciplines, something that is so beautifully realized in your own museums at the University of Porto, as I noted earlier. It is increasingly evident that as a society, we are faced with what seems to be intractable challenges of all forms, from climate change to the current scale of mass migration. Addressing all these matters requires thinking across many different disciplines. Researchers at our universities are intentionally blurring disciplinary boundaries, and large-scale collaborative scholarship is becoming much more commonplace. Universities are establishing cross-departmental teams and institutes, and our museums can leverage that expertise in our programs. This, of course, should be in our very own DNA. Museum collections and even individual objects have always had what you might call fuzzy borders themselves and are inherently multidimensional and cross-disciplinary. University museums can undertake programs that address these challenges in an environment that enables more risk-taking and experimentation. And our programs benefit from the intensive involvement of active researchers taking place in this environment, as I've said, that promotes cross-disciplinary endeavors. Prior to my work at the Peabody, I was executive director of the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture. We called it HMSC, a partnership of 6 museums at the university, including 3 science museums, 2 archaeology and anthropology museums, and a history of science museum. The goal was to build on the renewed excitement about the possibilities of museums in research and their role in pioneering pedagogy, and particularly an awareness that scholarship and education increasingly cross disciplines. In particular, a goal was to advance activities in novel areas that sit between traditionally distinct subjects, and to bridge the historic and contemporary intellectual domains of the separate museums and their associated departments. An educational project that had a major impact in catalyzing this new thinking about how collections could be used for learning on campus was the exhibit, book, class, and also MOOC course, Tangible Things, Harvard Collections in World History. This project featured 200 objects from collections across all the museums that varied from a tiger skull to a pineapple-shaped teapot. It was designed to encourage visitors and students to question traditional categories of knowledge and how such categories function to enable new knowledge, but at the same time may also inhibit discovery. The power of collaborative cross-disciplinary research between our museums and academic departments is also crucial. For example, the Initiative for the Science of the Human Past, run by a professor of medieval history, worked with a team of earth scientists studying ice core collections that provided evidence of cool, wet weather causing widespread famine in the years leading up to the Black Death epidemic in the 14th century, when between, as many of you I'm sure know, 1/3 and 1/2 of Europeans died of the plague. Significantly, it was a new, more sophisticated laser-based method of ice analysis of these historic collections that, together with tree ring data and archival evidence, transformed our understanding of this catastrophic event. Moving towards my final point around community engagement, let me give one more example of a cross-disciplinary project. In 2012, the Yale Peabody Museum collaborated with the School of Public Health and the Medical School to bring together anthropologists, public health advocates, sociologists, medical practitioners, and community members to create an exhibit on the obesity crisis. The resulting exhibition, Big Food, Health, Culture, and the Evolution of Eating, was developed to engage people in an important discourse around food, community, and health. It addressed historical context, biology, behavior, and the broad social and cultural inequities that drive this epidemic and may provide insight into solutions. The obesity epidemic is a serious local issue in the city of New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale is situated. There are several citywide efforts to address the challenge, for example, significant changes in the school lunch program. But the exhibition at the Peabody made a significant and unique contribution to this community crisis by providing an in-depth analysis of the global issue. We were able to use the resources of the university to explore human evolutionary history, nutritional needs, the industrialization of the agriculture industry, food marketing, and health consequences to show the complex basis of this health emergency. And presenting these themes as a whole helped visitors gain a more comprehensive understanding of the issues while learning how to take their own steps to address the crisis, both individually and as a community. So this leads me, of course, to the community, our local community. Big Food is one example of how a university can play an important role in the needs of our wider community. And this role to support the development and well-being of our local and regional communities has been all the more important since the beginning of the pandemic. Travel bans, the inequitable impact of COVID on different groups of people, the magnitude of hardship we continue to witness has reminded us about the importance of serving our neighbors. Even museums with a more traditional history have become more community-centered in their activities. You see museums providing space for food banks, for childcare, being sites for vaccination, and providing information and places for discussion on issues raised by the pandemic. Over the last few decades, there has been a transformation as museums seek to be relevant and benefit society in ways that go beyond the traditional collecting, preserving, and educating activities. This change has not been universally welcomed, as demonstrated by the debate at the International Council on Museums, an NGO affiliated with UNESCO, over the very definition of a museum. However, it's worth remembering that museums have been a vehicle for social change since their very beginning in classical antiquity, where they were seen as places to experience the power to change, facilitate social interaction, and address universal human concerns. Academic museums can make a difference in people's lives. And as the great museum thinker Stephen Weil consistently reminded us, museums need to matter to their communities. They need to make their full use of their potential, as he said, as places that have the potency to change what people may know or think or feel, to affect what attitudes they may adopt or display, and to influence what values they form. But I think, as was mentioned a little earlier, should museums strive to be active agents of social change by advancing particular perspectives and issues as they decide on their programs and other activities? There are two pieces of information that suggest to me the fundamental truth of Weil's call to action. First is the somewhat unsettling statistic that people spend only 5% of their entire lives in a classroom. So it is clear that informal lifelong learning is vital to enable people to become informed citizens, able to make decisions about critical topics that will impact their lives. Excuse me. Second, studies have shown that the public regard museums as highly trustworthy sources of the truth, far more than media, government entities, and other types of organization. Surveys in the United States have shown that this trust has increased during the pandemic. But it is not that people want or believe that museums should be neutral, if that were even possible, which I'm sure most of us would not even feel was possible. It is far more nuanced. People think museums should be engaged in societal issues and should recommend behaviors around their causes and mission, but it must be authentic and based on their perceived expertise. For example, natural history museums or aquaria can be straightforward in addressing climate change, while this may be seen as less appropriate for other types of museum where it is viewed as a potential political stance. But thinking again through an equity lens, museums have, as some might say, a moral responsibility to foster people's understanding of issues that are relevant and important to their lives. Museums and universities are a vital part of the ecosystem of nonprofits and other agencies that can improve education, health, and economic support. As my colleague Beth Merritt at the American Alliance of Museums has written, museums can help protect those most vulnerable to the economic and psychological damage wrought by the pandemic. And as institutions that have profited from inequitable systems, we have an obligation to help repair the damage of those systems. At the Peabody Museum, as an anthropology museum, our broader lens is reflected in an institutional commitment to recognizing and sustaining the rights and interests of the peoples whose cultural resources are stewarded in the collections, particularly the rights of Indigenous peoples as outlined in the 2007 UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The voices of Indigenous communities around cultural resources are crucial in confronting the economic, political, and social legacy of European settler colonialism. The Peabody has committed to engage in self-reflection regarding the structural legacy of colonial and racial biases and recognizing the special relationship between the Peabody and Indigenous communities. We strive for honest dialogue with the peoples for whom the collections hold cultural value. And through our curatorial practice, collection stewardship, exhibitions and operations, we aim to share authority with those communities to implement the culturally responsive care and interpretation of collections. And as we think about our collaboration with communities and addressing inequities, we must remember that history has shown us that wealth is far more than money. It includes assets like social connections, access to capital, knowledge, education, and political power. To build an equitable society, we need to create equal access to all these assets. And I believe areas where museums can help particularly is to improve access to knowledge, education, and social connections. 15 years ago, we set up an after-school program, Evolutions. It has a very long acronym that I'm not going to try and attempt to use right now, at the Yale Peabody Museum. It's a free science and college focused program that provides academic support and science career exploration for 120 students from the city of New Haven. And it focuses on supplementing the formal school experience and encourages students to see themselves as college-bound, scientifically literate citizens. It's an initiative that brings the university and local neighborhoods together. Throughout all 4 years of high school, students participate in weekly after-school classes focused on science career exploration, transferable skill development, and college preparation. Together, they form a community of STEM-focused, academically driven youth leaders. The students participate in hands-on science activities, go on field trips to colleges and universities, conduct research, and work in the museum galleries, all of which offer participants opportunities to develop a sophisticated set of communication, research, and workplace skills. They are building their assets. The program has been hugely successful and sustainable through its partnership with local community organizations and the schools, and the active involvement of the youth themselves in program design and implementation. In September 2020 at Harvard, we launched a project, Hear Me Out. That's goal is to expand Hispanic engagement by collaborating with 3 local community agencies and youth from 2 neighboring cities that have large Hispanic populations. The teens chose topics of importance to them, such as environmental change and bridging communities through language. And working with museum staff, they are creating photographs, audio, and video that reflect their views on topics related to culture and natural history, expanding their knowledge and giving them a voice and technical training. The audiovisual installations will, we hope, be available in the galleries for all to experience in 2021 when we reopen. In addition, teens in the 2 cohorts will receive letters of recommendation about the skills they have demonstrated on the project for use in future employment and to meet school requirements for voluntary community service. Again, the goal is to help them build assets that will help them throughout their lives. In conclusion, university museums need ambitions that are large. As we witness our planet's loss of biodiversity and as assaults on the world's cultural heritage intensify, our collections are primary evidence for the creation and dissemination of knowledge, both within and outside the academy. Together with our colleagues, we can facilitate and promote wide-ranging dialogue about these issues. We can convey to the public the excitement of the research and discovery going on in our universities. And at a time when we are living in what has been called a post-truth era, as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as, quote, when objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief, we can foster critical thinking and encourage our audiences to value evidence-based decision-making. And finally, we can be organizations that transform themselves by applying social justice values to our own work and by using our influence to increase the power and authority of others. The best museums enrich us all and improve the quality of life and well-being of individuals and their communities. And even as the fundamental pillars of our institutions are shaken by a realization of the inequities inherent in their formation, I continue to be excited by their potential. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Many thanks, Jane, for the new avenues for exploration you have disclosed and for the strategies for a new era, I would say, in museum work you have shared with us, and mostly I would say for showing how museums may help us think about the profound issues we are dealing with nowadays. So I can't thank you enough for this very, very inspiring speech. And now that we are reaching the end of the summit, allow me to take the opportunity to thank, well, I would say a lot of people. And I would like to start by thanking the team that has been behind the scenes putting this event together. And I do wish to show my, I would say, deepest gratitude for the hard work of Paulo Guzmão, Constança Freire, Maria João Fonseca, Anabela Santos, Susana Barros, Marco Gabriel, Raquel Jones, and Luís Pais and the whole team from Fly Media, as well as to the huge team that prepared the cultural breaks. Well, there are too many to be mentioned here by name, but I do thank each and every one of them. I also want I also wish to thank the National Plan for the Arts, in particular its commissioner, Paulo Pires Duval, for such a fruitful collaboration. Well, Paulo, we met just a few months ago, and look at where we are now, extending the National Plan for the Arts to higher education institutions and contributing to the construction of a European cultural corridor. I also want to thank what I would say the absolutely fantastic chairs of the 7 sessions for committing themselves to making their panels into participated spaces for discussing, for questioning, and for envisioning new perspectives and possibilities for culture. And I do wish to thank our distinguished speakers who from all over the world have contributed to the affirmation of higher education institutions as open learning environments, and open learning environments that are meant to do more than just prepare students with specialized training for the labor market. If I were to summarize what has been said over the past 2 days, I would say that it all comes to 2 main ideas. The first is that the arts, culture, and heritage are the transformational tools we need for the reformation of universities. And this will ultimately affect the communities, it will affect our society, it will affect the European Union. It is really possible to foster the union through culture and the arts, as the subtitle of the summit suggests. And the second conclusion is that this is the moment. We have the institutional will to change, and we have the funding tools we need at our disposal. We have the new agenda for culture, we have the strategic plan 2020-2024, and we have a variety of programs here in Europe where culture has been integrated as a priority. We have Horizon Europe, Creative Europe, Erasmus+, Erasmus Plus, just to name a few. So all we need to do is really sit together and create joint projects. I would also like to acknowledge the presence and I would say continuing support of Minister Manuel Heitor, Minister Graça Fonseca, European Commissioner Maria Gabriel, European Commissioner Elisa Ferreira, the Mayor of the City of Porto, Rui Moreira, the Chair of the European University Association, Michael Murphy, and the President-elect of the International Association of University Presidents, Fernando Leão Garcia. We are very much aware that things will only happen if we have the support and if we have the enthusiasm of policymakers. And we are really looking forward to making some progress on all the issues we have been discussing over the past 2 days. At the University of Porto, we are profoundly grateful for this opportunity we are offered to co-host this event along with National Plan for the Arts, and thus within the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of Europe. We feel that something very meaningful has just happened in the summit, the beginning of something new. And I would say that it's with this mixed feeling of excitement and responsibility that, along with my deepest gratitude for the continuing support, I hand over the floor, or the virtual floor, to Minister Manuel Heitor and to Minister Graça Fonseca to declare the summit closed.
Thank you very much, Fatima. And first of all, let me acknowledge the hard work yourself and Paulo Pires Duval has put together to make this summit a reality. And let me thank you for all your efforts, together with those in the staff of the presidency of the Portuguese Presidency of the European Council. It has been certainly 2 very active days. Certainly I lost a lot of content, but I could participate in a few of the sessions, and it was, or it is very clear that the most important conclusion that we can achieve now at the end of the summit are the deepness of the ideas and the diversity of ideas. I'm not completely sure if the statement Fatima just made about that university and culture will be the transformation, certainly will be one of the transformation, and we should work in a stepwise process to make sure that actually, as very well Jane Pickering mentioned, to open access to everyone, but also to diversify and specialize access to culture, particularly of higher education students, but also as a way to facilitate their inclusion in our diversified and increasing diversified societies, and usually in our increased complex landscape where we all live. And certainly it was very important that many speakers put together the idea of critical thinking of students, and particularly the role of the arts in the very much liberal arts, meaningful about the way to really introduce arts in study plans, particularly in terms of provoking this critical thinking in a way that we can have a full teaching and learning system. Actually, earlier this morning, it was very interesting to look at the way Philipp Werner, the director of the Serralves Museum, introduced the idea of teaching and learning as art performers within the university landscape, and particularly looking at the relations between museums and universities in a way to also learn from the way art performers do their task, so that teachers and students can learn also the way to introduce critical thinking in their daily performance. But certainly many other ideas came from throughout these 2 days of hard working. And again, I thank you, the commissioners and the organizers, for introducing such a wide variety of thinkers, from philosophers to novelists, art performers to musicians, and essentially this dialogue between university leaders, policymakers, and artists in general, including many curators, was particularly important. Let me briefly conclude with 2, I will say, recommendations, or more than recommendations, 2 challenges. Yesterday was clear that during this summit, it was launched the preparation of a so-called Porto Declaration on University and Culture, and I would like to strengthen the value, the needs, and the relevance of that declaration, which I would like to emphasize how important it will be if, gaining from the different contributions during the conference, we ask once more to Fatima and Paulo to put that declaration open for public discussion until the end of April, so that it could be a real and effective declaration in the coming months, certainly in 2021, during the launch of many of the calls associated with Horizon Europe and with the processes under which we can really better understand your ideas, to provoke a number of initiatives in the area of research and innovation, but also, as Maria Gabriel mentioned yesterday, to really make these ideas into many of the existing European universities alliances, as well as within the Erasmus Plus program, which we will launch on June 17 in the north of Portugal. So the Porto Declaration, I'm sure, will gain from many ideas brought out during these 2 days, and could be relevant and very timely idea, particularly under this potential challenge of opening up an European corridor for culture towards higher education students. The idea that every single higher education student in Europe can have free access to museums, art exhibitions, and many other cultural arts and music performance could be a particularly interesting idea, which I'm sure will gain many stakeholders throughout Europe, and could certainly be a very positive and timely result out of this conference. Certainly, a declaration open to be signed by every single individual throughout Europe could gain a lot of impact, and I will say activism also among students, among artists, among researchers, and therefore I believe in the days we live on to call for the collective action towards our democratic life throughout Europe. So I would like very much to challenge yourself to move forward this Porto Declaration as yourself have announced yesterday. My second point is actually earlier today, discussing with Commissioner Maria Gabriel the impact of many of the speakers yesterday, and also with Christian Eller, member of the European Parliament that is in charge of research and innovation, and within Horizon Europe in particular, in the area of research on the cultural heritage and creative industries. We have agreed to organize before the end of June, probably late May, a roundtable bringing together many stakeholders on research and innovation, in order that we can better plan within Horizon Europe the future of the calls which are associated with research activities in the areas of cultural heritage and creative industries. Certainly, this roundtable could gain a lot from the Porto Declaration, or at least from insights that will be by that time discussed throughout the Porto Declaration on the university and culture, and therefore I will again challenge yourself to contribute in an open dialogue, certainly with the European Parliament, with the Commission, and certainly with the Presidency of the Council, but most and foremost, congratulations for the achievements done and for all the ideas which were put together throughout these 2 days. Certainly, for closing remark, Graça will report also on the impact on the national level. Thank you very much all.
Obrigada. Good afternoon. Thank you. Very really something very important for the future we believe, and me and Monitor have been working a lot together on this path, and I'm sure that we will proceed on this in next years. Let me then address in Portuguese, our own language, since we have translation, so I will use the Portuguese to these closing remarks.
The subject that we set out to address, namely the multiple intersections between university education and each individual's cultural development, far from coming to a close, has opened up a plethora of new directions, interpretations, and debates that will certainly continue far beyond the here and now. Latin was once the common language and frame of reference that eased the flow of people and ideas through Europe's great universities. In the concept of a university that we have discussed, I think we can all agree that academic and scientific education, complemented continually by studies in arts and culture, can and should be the new common language and reference among all those who teach and those who learn. The language of culture is a voice that does not limit itself to talking about the world in a critical and informed manner, but that transforms it. As far as we know, the language of art and imagination is the only truly magical language whose reverberations are capable of altering reality. What would become of science without the great lesson in artistic creation so superbly expressed by Lewis Carroll? The ability to believe in several impossible things all before breakfast. I think that we have not yet accomplished the impossible. However, through the National Arts Plan and in such a short space of time, the truth is that we are coming close to doing so. In just over 2 years, the National Arts Plan has been exemplary in achieving its revolutionary goal, promoting cultural and artistic education, which has an impact at all levels in the education of young Portuguese. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention one of the next steps that the Ministry of Culture will be taking through the National Arts Plan. This is the meeting that will take place in Porto Santo on the 27th and 28th of April, dedicated to the relationship between culture, the arts, and education, once again under the Portuguese Presidency of the Council. This meeting aims to affirm these areas as pillars of a cultural democracy in a European context. Leading up to the event, and together with our 26 partners, as well as with civil society bodies, inputs will be considered to form part of the Porto Santo Charter. This document will share guidelines to strengthen the resilience of our societies. The National Arts Plan is transforming the teaching of art and culture in schools. The natural progression of this higher purpose is to now extend its contributions to higher education, ensuring that culture is not only a permanent and active presence at all stages of education and development of our learners, but also an essential tool for teachers. It is important to stress this. The National Arts Plan is a tool for those who learn, but also for those who teach. In this respect, I would like to congratulate the University of Porto for its pioneering role in these projects. I would like to take this opportunity to applaud the announcement and to thank the announcement concerning the new course units in transversal skills starting in the next academic year, 4 of which are the result of partnerships with cultural institutions such as the Soares dos Reis National Museum, the São João National Theatre, the Casa da Música Concert Hall, and the Botanical Garden of Porto. I would also like to congratulate the University of Porto for the Porto Cultural Corridor Initiative, which promotes free access to all university students to the museums of the university, the municipality, and in addition to the Soares do Reis National Museum, as well as to the performances at the São João National Theatre, among other venues of the city. These kinds of partnerships between universities and national museums and theatres are essential if these facilities are to fulfill their public mission. Indeed, as national institutions, it is part of their DNA to be integrated into and to serve their cities. And what better way for a museum or theatre to serve its city and community than to be open to those who are studying? So what can we propose? Extending this initiative even further, convening with other universities and cities, establishing partnerships with national cultural facilities, including those that form part of the Portuguese Museums Network, the Network of Theatres and Cinemas, and the Contemporary Art Network. This is one impossible thing to believe in before breakfast, but which we can turn into reality immediately afterwards. Thank you very much.